The scent of her own burned flesh still clung to her skin. Kaya had been running for 3 days, and the brand on her left shoulder blade hadn't stopped screaming. Not the kind of pain that fades with distance or time. This was different. Deeper. The kind that burrowed into bone and whispered that it would never leave, that she would carry this mark into whatever death waited for her in these frozen woods. Her bare feet left bloody prints in the snow. She didn't care. The exiles weren't supposed to care about anything anymore. That's what they'd told her when they held her down in the center of the pack circle, when the iron rod glowed white-hot in the elder's hand, when her alpha, her own blood, her cousin, turned his back and let them carve the symbol of betrayal into her flesh. They said the mark would sever her from the pack bond. They said it would make her wolfless, powerless, unworthy of a name. They lied about the powerless part. She could feel it now, coiling beneath the brand like something alive. Something furious. It had been stirring since the moment she crossed the border into the Shadowlands, into territory that belonged to him. The Alpha King. Ronin. Even his name tasted like danger on her tongue, though she'd never spoken it aloud. Every wolf in the northern packs knew what happened to traitors who fled into his domain. They didn't come back. Kaya wasn't planning to either. She came here to disappear. To let the cold or the wild beasts finish what her pack had started. Exile was supposed to be a slow death sentence, but she didn't have the patience for slow. If the world wanted her gone, she'd go. But she'd do it on her terms, in a place where no one from her old life would ever find her bones. The wind cut through the trees like a blade, sharp enough to steal the breath from her lungs. Snow fell in thick, silent curtains, erasing her tracks almost as fast as she made them. Good. She didn't want to be followed. Didn't want some hunting party dragging her back to make an example of her all over again. The brand was example enough. She stumbled over a root hidden beneath the snow and went down hard, her knees cracking against frozen ground. The impact sent a fresh wave of agony radiating from the mark, so fierce her vision widened out for a moment. When it cleared, she was on her hands and knees, shaking, her breath coming in ragged clouds. Get up. The voice in her head wasn't hers. Or maybe it was, but it sounded different now. Older. Wilder. It had started whispering the moment the iron touched her skin, and it hadn't stopped since. Get up. They're coming. Kaya lifted her head, scanning the dark forest. Nothing moved except the snow and the skeletal branches swaying overhead. But the voice was right. She could feel it in her gut, in the prickling awareness that crawled up her spine. She wasn't alone anymore. Forcing herself to her feet, she pressed one bloodied hand against a tree trunk for balance. Her body was failing. She knew that. 3 days without food, without shelter, without sleep, it was catching up to her. The brand had stolen more than her place in the pack. It was draining something vital, something she didn't have a name for. Every hour, she felt a little less solid, a little more like she was fading at the edges. But that thing beneath the mark, that coiled, seething presence, was growing stronger. She'd felt it flare when the elder carved the final line of the symbol, a burst of searing heat that made the old wolf stumble back with fear in his eyes. She'd felt it pulse when her cousin refused to meet her gaze, when he declared her nameless and ordered her beyond the boundary stones. And she felt it now, rising like a second heartbeat, wild and defiant and utterly uncontrollable. The brand was supposed to suppress it. Bury it. Seal it away so deep it could never surface. It wasn't working. Kaya forced herself forward, deeper into the woods. The trees here were ancient, their trunks wide as houses, their roots twisting through the earth like the bones of sleeping giants. This was old land. Sacred land. The kind of place where the veil between worlds grew thin and the moon's voice sang clearest. Her grandmother used to tell stories about forests like this, about the magic that lived in the spaces between shadow and light. Her grandmother had also told her that some bloodlines were too dangerous to survive. Kaya hadn't understood what that meant. Not until the night they came for her. She'd been in her room, packing herbs for the healer's stores when the council arrived. No warning. No explanation. Just 6 wolves in human form, flanking her cousin, the Alpha, whose face was carved from stone. They searched her belongings. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. And still, they dragged her to the center of the pack village and stripped her to the waist in front of everyone she'd ever known. The elder spoke the accusation in a voice that carried to every corner of the gathering. Traitor. Conspirator. Threat to the bloodline. She'd screamed that it wasn't true. She'd begged her cousin to stop this, to defend her, to remember that they'd grown up together, that she'd never wanted anything but to serve the pack. He looked at her once. Just once. And in his eyes, she saw something worse than anger. Fear. He was afraid of her. That's when she knew the accusation didn't matter. Guilty or innocent, it made no difference. They needed her gone, and they would make sure she stayed that way. The iron rod sank into her flesh with a sound like meat on a spit, and the world exploded into white-hot agony. She didn't remember screaming, but her throat was raw for days after. She didn't remember the exact moment the pack bond severed, but she felt the absence like a limb torn away, a hollow ache that echoed in her chest. What she did remember was the heat beneath the pain. The surge of something vast and ancient that reared up inside her the moment the brand touched skin, something that roared in a language she didn't know but understood in her bones. They branded her to silence it. Instead, they woke it up. A branch snapped somewhere behind her. Kaya froze, her pulse slamming against her ribs. She didn't turn around. Didn't breathe. The forest had gone too quiet, the kind of silence that meant predators were near. Another snap. Closer this time. Her hands curled into fists, nails biting into her palms. She had no weapons. No strength left to fight. If it was a rival pack scouts, they'd kill her for trespassing. If it was something worse, one of the shadow beasts that prowled the Shadowlands, she wouldn't last 10 seconds. Run. The voice was louder now, more insistent. Run. She ran. Her feet barely touched the ground, her body moving on instinct and adrenaline. The forest blurred around her, snow and shadow and the skeletal reach of branches. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move, had to put distance between herself and whatever was tracking her. The brand burned hotter with every step, as if it knew she was trying to escape. As if it wanted to drag her back. She broke through a line of trees and stumbled into a clearing, chest heaving, vision swimming. The snow here was untouched, smooth as glass, reflecting the pale moonlight filtering through the clouds. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone, taller than any wolf in their shifted form, its surface carved with symbols too worn to read. Kaya's legs gave out. She collapsed a few feet from the stone, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. The cold seeped through her torn clothes into her skin, numbing the pain inch by inch. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was where it ended. Alone in a frozen clearing, beneath a moon that had already forgotten her name, she closed her eyes. And then she felt it. The shift in the air. The weight of a presence so powerful it made the ground tremble beneath her. Her eyes snapped open. He stood at the edge of the clearing, a shadow among shadows, but she knew what he was the moment she saw him. The way he moved silent, controlled, every step deliberate. The way the forest itself seemed to pull back, as if making room for something apex. Something unchallenged. An alpha. No, the alpha. Ronin. She'd never seen him before, but there was no mistaking him. He was taller than any wolf she'd known, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, his presence a physical force that pressed against her like a hand around her throat. Dark hair fell past his collar, and even in the dim light, she could see the sharp lines of his face, strong jaw, high cheekbones, eyes that gleamed like polished steel. Those eyes locked onto her, and the world stopped. Everything stopped. The bond hit her like lightning splitting a tree, A violent snap of connection that tore through her chest and wrapped around something deep inside her, something she didn't know existed until that exact moment. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't kind. It was raw and primal and so overwhelming she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but feel the absolute certainty of it. Mate. No. No. This couldn't be happening. Not to her. Not now. Exiles didn't get mates. The brand made sure of that. It was part of the curse, part of the punishment. No alpha would ever claim her. No bond would ever form. That's what they'd promised when they carved the mark into her skin. But here he was, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, shock, maybe, or fury, or something darker, and the bond pulsed between them like a living thing, demanding acknowledgement, demanding submission, demanding everything. Ronan took a step forward. Kaya tried to scramble back, but her body wouldn't obey. She was too weak, too broken, and the bond was pulling at her, urging her toward him even as every rational part of her brain screamed to run. He moved closer, slow and predatory, his gaze never leaving hers. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough, edged with something dangerous. You. One word. That's all he said. But the way he said it, like an accusation and a revelation and a curse all at once, made her blood run cold. He knew. Somehow, he already knew. Kaya's vision blurred at the edges, her body finally surrendering to the cold and the pain and the impossible reality of what had just happened. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was Ronan closing the distance between them, his hand reaching out, his expression shifting into something she couldn't name. And then nothing. When consciousness tried to claw its way back, she was moving. No, being carried. Strong arms held her against a chest that radiated heat, each step smooth and unhurried. She could hear a heartbeat, steady and sure, so different from the frantic racing of her own. She should fight. Should demand to be put down. Should do anything except let the enemy Alpha King carry her deeper into his territory. But the bond was singing, a harmony she'd never heard before, and for the first time in 3 days, the brand had stopped screaming. For the first time since they'd carved her skin and stolen her name, she felt almost safe. The thought terrified her more than anything else. Kaya forced her eyes open, just a sliver, just enough to see his face above her. He wasn't looking down. His gaze was fixed straight ahead, jaw tight, a muscle ticking in his cheek. He looked furious. Or maybe stricken. It was hard to tell in the darkness. Put me down, she tried to say, but it came out as barely a whisper, hoarse and broken. His eyes snapped to hers. For a moment, they just stared at each other, and she saw it, the war happening behind that controlled exterior. The bond pulling him one direction, his duty pulling him another. You're hurt, he said finally. Not an answer. A statement. I'm exiled. Her voice cracked on the word. Branded. You're supposed to kill me. Something flickered across his face, too fast to catch. I know what you are. Her heart stuttered. Then why? Because you're mine. The words cut through the air like a blade, sharp and absolute. Not a question. Not a request. A claim. And before she could process it, before she could argue or fight or do anything, he shifted his grip and pulled her closer, his hand pressing against the brand on her shoulder blade. The effect was instantaneous. The seal flared, hot and vicious, but something else flared with it, that coiled presence beneath her skin, rising to meet his touch. Power recognized power. And in that collision, in that impossible moment of contact, Kaya felt the first crack spider across the brand's surface. Ronan felt it too. His whole body went rigid, his eyes widening with something that looked like shock. What did they do to you? He breathed, and for the first time, she heard something other than authority in his voice. She heard horror. The clearing was far behind them now, swallowed by the forest. Wherever he was taking her, it was deeper into the Shadowlands, farther from everything she'd ever known. She should be afraid. Should be planning escape. But the bond hummed between them, insistent and undeniable, and the truth settled over her like fresh snow. There was no going back. There was only forward, into whatever fate the moon had written for them both. And as Ronan carried her through the darkness, his arm steady and his heartbeat strong against her ear, Kaya felt the brand pulse one more time, not with pain, but with warning. The seal was breaking. And when it finally shattered, everything would burn. If you're already hooked, if you can feel that bond snapping into place, subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library, because this is only the beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens when he discovers the truth. Kaya woke to warmth. That was the first shock. After 3 days of cold so deep it had settled into her marrow, heat felt wrong. Foreign. Her body didn't know what to do with it, and for a few disoriented seconds, she thought maybe she died after all. Maybe this was whatever came after, some final mercy the moon granted to the abandoned. Then she felt the softness beneath her. Furs. Real furs, thick and luxurious, nothing like the rough wool blankets she'd grown up with. They cocooned her, heavy and warm, and beneath them she could feel the solid surface of a bed. An actual bed. Her eyes flew open. Stone walls. A vaulted ceiling crossed with dark wooden beams. A fireplace carved directly into the rock, flames dancing and crackling, casting shifting shadows across the room. This wasn't a tent or a hastily built shelter. This was permanent. Established. The kind of place that spoke of power and resources and absolute control over territory. She was in his stronghold. Panic spiked through her chest, sharp and immediate. Kaya tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her body screamed in protest, every muscle stiff and aching, the brand on her shoulder blade pulsing with a dull, persistent throb. She made it halfway upright before her arms gave out, and she collapsed back against the furs with a choked gasp. "Don't." The voice came from the shadows near the door, low and commanding. Not loud, but weighted with the kind of authority that made disobedience feel impossible. Ronan stepped into the firelight and Kaya's breath caught. She'd seen him in the clearing, but barely. Darkness and exhaustion had blurred the details. Now, with the flames illuminating his features, she could truly see him, and the sight sent a confusing tangle of fear and something else entirely through her veins. He was devastating. Not handsome in any soft or gentle way. His face was all hard edges and sharp lines, the kind of masculine beauty that looked carved from stone and tempered by violence. Dark hair fell just past his shoulders, some of it pulled back, the rest framing a face that might have been called cruel if not for his eyes. They were pale, almost silver in the firelight, and they watched her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. He wore simple clothes, dark pants, a fitted shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars. No crown. No ceremonial robes. He didn't need them. Power radiated from him like heat from the fire, undeniable and absolute. This was the Alpha King. The wolf every pack in the Northern Territories feared. The one who'd unified the Shadowlands through strength and ruthlessness, who enforced his borders with brutal efficiency, who showed no mercy to traitors or trespassers. And he was her mate. The bond hummed between them, a constant awareness she couldn't shut off. She could feel him in a way that defied logic, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the tension coiled in his muscles, the storm of emotions he kept locked behind that controlled exterior. It was invasive and intimate and absolutely terrifying. Ronan crossed the room with that same predatory grace she'd noticed in the clearing, every movement economical and precise. He stopped a few feet from the bed, keeping distance between them, but his gaze never wavered. "How long?" Kaya's voice came out rougher than she intended, her throat still raw. 2 days. 2 days. She'd been unconscious for 2 days. Her hand instinctively went to her shoulder, fingers finding the ridge of scarred tissue beneath the soft fabric of she looked down. Someone had changed her clothes. The torn, bloodied rags were gone, replaced by a loose shirt that was far too large, the sleeves falling past her hands. His shirt. She could smell him on it, pine and smoke and something darker, something that made the bond purr with satisfaction even as her rational mind recoiled. Who? She started, but he cut her off. A healer. Female. I wasn't here. His jaw tightened. I wouldn't have touched you without permission. The clarification felt important to him, though Kaya wasn't sure why. Alphas didn't usually concern themselves with the permission of exiles. Especially not exiles who'd trespassed on their land. She pulled the furs higher, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. Alone in a room with the most dangerous wolf in the north, wearing his clothes, weak enough that she couldn't even sit up on her own. If he wanted to kill her, she couldn't stop him. If he wanted to do anything else. I'm not going to hurt you. Kaya's eyes snapped to his. He said it like he could read her thoughts, like the fear bleeding through the bond was loud enough for him to hear. You don't know that, she said. Because he didn't. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his hands curled and uncurled at his sides. He was fighting something, and she wasn't naive enough to think the outcome was guaranteed. Ronan's expression shifted, something dangerous flickering across his features. You're right. I don't. The honesty shocked her more than a lie would have. Alphas didn't admit uncertainty. They didn't show weakness. But here he was, standing in the firelight, looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve and a threat he couldn't eliminate and something precious he wasn't allowed to keep. Why am I alive? Kaya forced herself to hold his gaze. Your laws are clear. Branded exiles cross your border, they die. No exceptions. There are always exceptions. Not for traitors. You're not a traitor. The words hit her like a fist to the chest. She waited for him to elaborate, to explain how he could possibly know that, but he just stared at her with those pale, unreadable eyes. The brand says otherwise, she finally managed. The brand is a lie. Kaya's heart stuttered. What? Ronan moved closer, and she instinctively pressed back against the headboard. He noticed, and something that might have been pain crossed his face before he locked it down. He stopped at the edge of the bed, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, close enough that the bond screamed at her to reach out, to touch, to close the unbearable distance. I need to see it, he said. No. Kaya. Her name on his lips sent a shockwave through her system. How do you know my name? He didn't answer. Just kept watching her with that intense, burning focus that made her feel like he could see straight through her skin to everything she'd tried to bury. How do you know my name? She asked again, harder this time. Ronan exhaled slowly, and for the first time, she saw the cracks in his control. The exhaustion around his eyes. The tension in his jaw. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, who'd been fighting a losing battle with himself and was finally reaching the breaking point. Because I've been looking for you for 5 years. The world tilted. Kaya stared at him, trying to process the words, trying to make them make sense. That's impossible. I've never left my pack's territory. I've never. You have a birthmark, Ronan interrupted, his voice rough. Left hip. Shaped like a crescent moon. Ice flooded her veins. That birthmark was hidden. Always hidden. The only people who knew about it were the healer who delivered her and her grandmother, who'd taken one look at it when Kaya was a baby and gone pale as death. How? You have silver in your wolf's eyes. Not gray. True silver, like starlight. She'd shifted exactly once in her life, alone in the woods where no one could see, because even at 15 she'd known instinctively that there was something different about her wolf, something that needed to stay hidden. Your bloodline, Ronan continued, and now his voice had dropped to something almost reverent, almost afraid. It's not what they told you. Your grandmother knew. That's why she made you promise never to shift in front of the pack. That's why she warned you to stay small, stay quiet, never draw attention. Tears burned at the back of Kaya's eyes. Her grandmother had made her promise exactly that, the night before she died. She'd gripped Kaya's hand with surprising strength for someone so frail and made her swear on the moon itself that she would hide. Always hide. Who am I? The question came out broken, barely a whisper. Ronan's hands clenched into fists. You're the one they tried to erase. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Kaya couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. Every certainty she'd built her life on was crumbling, and she didn't know how to stop it. The brand, Ronan said, his voice tight. It's not a mark of exile. It's a seal. Blood magic, old and vicious. Designed to suppress power, to lock away a bloodline so completely that even the wolf can't access it. That's not possible. Blood magic has been forbidden for 100 years. Since the purge. His eyes burned into hers. Since my grandfather slaughtered every wolf carrying the old bloodlines, the ones that predated the pack system, the ones with power that didn't bow to alpha dominance. Kaya's stomach twisted. Every wolf knew about the purge. It was taught as history, as necessity. The old bloodlines had been too dangerous, too chaotic. They'd threatened the stability of pack structure. Ronan's grandfather had done what needed to be done to protect the future. At least, that's what the story said. He didn't get them all, Ronan continued, and now there was something raw in his voice, something that sounded like guilt. Some survived. Went into hiding. Bred the power down through generations, buried it so deep that most descendants never even knew what they carried. And you think I'm me? I don't think. I know. He took another step closer, and this time Kaya didn't pull away. The silver flame bloodline. The ones who could heal with a touch or kill with a thought, who could speak to the moon herself and command the wild magic that existed before packs, before alphas, before any of this. The coiled presence beneath her brand stirred, responding to his words like it recognized them. They're gone, Kaya said, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. They're all gone. Your grandmother was the last full blood. Ronan's gaze dropped to her shoulder, to where the brand lay hidden beneath the shirt. Which makes you the last half-blood. The last living link to a power that could. He cut himself off, jaw clenching. Could what? End my bloodline's rule. The words came out flat, emotionless, but the bond carried the truth beneath them. Fear. Not of her, but of what she represented. The silver flame could challenge alpha dominance. Break it. Return the packs to the old ways, before hierarchy, before kings, Kaya finished. Ronan nodded once, sharp and controlled. The implications crashed over her like a wave. If what he was saying was true, if she really carried that bloodline, then the brand made terrible, perfect sense. Her pack hadn't exiled her for treason. They'd exiled her to hide her. To keep this alpha king from finding out that his grandfather's genocide had failed, that the very power his dynasty was built on destroying still existed. Your council knows, she said. It wasn't a question. Something dark and furious flashed across Ronan's face. My father's council. Yes. They ordered the brand. Yes. To protect you. To protect the throne. His voice turned sharp, bitter. They don't give a damn about me. Just the bloodline. The dynasty. The power structure that keeps them in control. Kaya studied him, seeing past the Alpha King exterior for the first time. Seeing the man trapped beneath the crown he never asked for, surrounded by advisors he couldn't trust, enforcing laws built on genocide and lies. You could have killed me, she said softly. In the clearing. The moment you scented what I was, you could have ended it. No one would have questioned you. No. Why not? The bond flared between them, hot and insistent, and Ronan's control finally cracked. He moved fast, closing the distance, his hands coming down on either side of her, caging her against the headboard without touching her. She could feel the heat of him, the barely leashed power, the war raging beneath his skin. Because the moment I caught your scent, the moment the bond snapped into place, you stopped being a threat. His voice was rough, raw, every word dragged from somewhere deep. You became the only thing in this world I can't survive losing. Kaya's breath caught. The bond sang between them, electric and overwhelming, and she could feel his truth like it was her own. The mate bond didn't care about politics or bloodlines or the weight of history. It didn't care that she was supposed to be his enemy, that claiming her could destroy everything he'd built. It only cared that they were two halves of the same whole, and separation would kill them both. "You marked me," she whispered, remembering the moment in the clearing, his hand over her brand. Over the seal. "I had to." His eyes burned into hers. "It was already killing you." The brand, they made it too strong, poured too much power into it. It was crushing your wolf, suffocating everything you are. "If I hadn't marked you, you'd have been dead within a week. So you saved me. I condemned you." The words came out broken. "Because now the seal is breaking, and when it shatters completely, your power will surface. And my council, my father's old guard, they'll know. They'll demand I execute you. And if I refuse..." Rebellion, Kaya finished. "Your own people will turn on you." Ronan's jaw clenched. "Civil war. The pacts will fracture. Everything my grandfather built, every sacrifice made to unify the Shadowlands, it'll burn. Then reject the bond." The words hung in the air between them, terrible and final. Ronan stared at her, and for a moment she saw past every wall, every defense. She saw the Alpha King who'd spent his entire life carrying the weight of a crown built on slaughter. Who'd enforced his grandfather's laws because he thought he had to, because stability seemed worth the cost. Who'd been searching for her for 5 years, not to kill her, but because some part of him knew that the stories were lies, that the purge was wrong, that the power they'd tried to destroy was never the real threat. "I can't," he said, and his voice broke on the words. "I've already tried. The moment I marked you, I tried to sever it. Spent 2 days fighting the bond, trying to force the rejection. And it almost killed me." He exhaled shakily. "And it didn't even crack. We're too far gone, Kaya. The bond's too strong. Rejection would destroy us both." She believed him. Could feel the truth of it in the way the bond wrapped around her ribs, anchoring itself to something vital and irreplaceable. "So we're trapped," she said. "No." Ronan's hand lifted, hovering near her face, not quite touching. "I am. You could still run. The mark will sustain you long enough to cross the southern border. There are packs there that don't know your face, don't care about old bloodlines. You could disappear. Live. And you. I'll endure it. I'm strong enough to survive a severed bond. It won't be pleasant, but..." "Liar." His eyes snapped to hers, surprised. Kaya leaned forward, closing the distance he'd so carefully maintained. "You're lying. To me or to yourself, I'm not sure. But I can feel it through the bond. You wouldn't survive. Neither would I." Ronan's control shattered. His forehead dropped to hers, not quite a kiss, just desperate contact, the first real touch they'd shared. The bond roared to life, flooding her system with warmth and rightness and a sense of belonging she'd never felt, not even before the exile. "I'm sorry," he breathed against her skin. "I'm so sorry. If I'd found you sooner, if I'd known what they were planning. You couldn't have stopped it." "I could have tried." Kaya's hand lifted, shaking, and settled against his chest. Beneath her palm, his heart raced. "What happens now?" Ronan pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and in their pale depths she saw resignation and determination, and something that looked like hope struggling to stay alive. "Now we prepare for war." His hand finally touched her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Because I'm not giving you up. Not to my council, not to my father's legacy, not to fate itself. If choosing you means burning the kingdom down, then I'll light the match myself." The promise settled over her like a vow, and Kaya felt the seal crack a little more, felt the power beneath it stir in response to his words. The moon already knew how this would end. The only question was how much blood would be spilled before they reached it. Kaya didn't sleep that night. How could she, when every time she closed her eyes she was back in the circle, surrounded by faces she'd known her entire life, watching as they turned to stone. When she could still smell the iron heating in the coals, still hear the elder's voice pronouncing judgment, still feel her cousin's hand on her shoulder, not comfort, but restraint, holding her in place for the brand. She lay in Ronan's bed, wrapped in furs that smelled like him, and let the memory she'd been running from finally catch up. The worst part hadn't been the pain. Pain was temporary, survivable. The worst part had been the silence. No one spoke for her. Not a single voice rose in her defense. The wolves she'd healed when they were sick, the children she'd taught to identify safe herbs from poisonous ones, the hunters she'd stitched back together after bad hunts, they all stood there, mute and still, and watched her burn. Her cousin, Alpha Kieran, though she still couldn't think of him that way, not when she remembered him as the boy who'd cried in her arms when his father died, had been the one to give the order. His voice hadn't wavered, hadn't even cracked. Traitor. The word echoed in her skull like a curse. Traitor to the pack. Traitor to the bloodline. Traitor to everything we stand for. She'd screamed herself hoarse denying it. Begged them to tell her what she'd supposedly done, what evidence they had, what proof existed of this betrayal. They gave her nothing. Just the brand and the exile and the tearing sensation as the pack bond ripped away, leaving a wound that still hadn't healed. Kaya shifted restlessly, the movement sending a dull ache through her shoulder. The brand pulsed in response, but it was different now. Muted. Ever since Ronan had marked her, the seal felt less like a burning coal pressed to her skin and more like a cage with weakening bars. She could feel whatever lived beneath it moving, testing the boundaries, searching for cracks. It terrified her. Because part of her, the part that had been raised to be small and quiet and grateful for her place in the pack, still believed them. Still wondered if maybe they'd been right to fear her. If maybe the thing living under her skin really was a threat that needed to be contained. Her grandmother would have hated that thought. Nara. Her name had been Nara, though toward the end she'd forbidden Kaya from speaking it aloud, from drawing any attention to their connection. She'd been ancient when she died, her hair pure white, her hands gnarled with age, but her eyes had stayed sharp until the very end. Those eyes had seen things Kaya could only imagine. Lived through horrors she refused to speak about. The memories came in fragments, sharp-edged and painful. She'd been 7 when her grandmother first took her into the deep woods, far beyond the pack's usual territory. They'd walked for hours, until the trees grew so thick the sunlight barely penetrated and the air tasted different, wilder, older, like the forest remembered a time before wolves learned to walk on 2 legs. Nara had stopped in a clearing much like the one where Ronan found her, marked by a standing stone covered in symbols. She'd knelt in the grass and pulled Kaya down beside her. "Listen," she'd said, and her voice had carried a weight it never did in the pack village. "Listen to what the earth is telling you." Kaya had closed her eyes and tried. At first, she'd heard nothing but wind and birdsong. But then, slowly, she'd started to feel it, a pulse beneath the ground, steady and ancient, like a heartbeat that had been beating since before time had a name. It thrummed through her bones, resonating with something deep in her chest, and for a moment she'd felt connected to everything. The trees, the stone, the sky, her grandmother's weathered hand in hers. "Do you feel it?" Nara had whispered. Kaya had nodded, tears streaming down her face though she didn't know why. "That's your birthright. Your blood remembers what the world has forgotten." Her grandmother's grip had tightened. "But you must never let them see it. Never let them know what you carry. Promise me." She'd promised, though she hadn't understood. Not then. Understanding came later, in pieces scattered across the years. The first piece came when she was 12 and old enough to help in the healer's lodge. She'd been grinding herbs when one of the hunters was brought in, his leg torn open by a bear's claws, blood pooling on the floor faster than the healer could stanch it. The man was dying. Everyone knew it. They were just trying to make him comfortable. Kaya had touched his leg, meaning only to help clean the wound, and heat had exploded through her palm. Not painful, but intense, like lightning channeling through her skin. The hunter had gasped, his back arching, and when Kaya pulled away, the wound was closed. Not healed perfectly, a thick scar remained, but closed enough that he wasn't bleeding out anymore. The healer had stared at her with something that looked like horror. Nara had been there within minutes, pulling Kaya aside, gripping her shoulders hard enough to bruise. "What did I tell you?" she'd hissed. "What did I tell you about hiding?" "I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't matter. Results do." Her grandmother's face had been pale, her hands shaking. "We'll say the healer did it. That you were just assisting. And you," she'd cupped Kaya's face, forcing eye contact. "You will never do that again. Not for anyone. No matter who's dying. Do you understand?" Kaya had nodded, terrified by the fear in her grandmother's eyes. They'd covered it up. The healer, who owed Nara more favors than Kaya could count, took credit for saving the hunter. Life went on. But after that, Nara started teaching her in earnest, not healing, but control. How to suppress the heat that built in her palms when she was emotional. How to breathe through the moments when power rose in her throat like words demanding to be spoken. How to make herself smaller, quieter, more forgettable. How to survive in a world that would kill her if it knew what she was. The second piece came 3 years later, the night she shifted for the first time. Every wolf shifted around 15, usually during a full moon ceremony surrounded by their pack. It was supposed to be a celebration, a rite of passage. Kaya's turn was coming up, and she'd been excited despite her grandmother's warnings. She'd dreamed about her wolf her whole life, wondered what color her fur would be, how it would feel to run on 4 legs instead of 2. But a week before the ceremony, she'd woken in the middle of the night with her skin on fire. Not painful, just wrong, like her body didn't fit anymore. She'd stumbled outside, past the sleeping village, into the woods where no one would hear. The shift had taken her without warning, brutal and overwhelming, and when it was done she'd stood on shaking legs and looked down at paws that gleamed silver in the moonlight. Not gray. Not white. True silver, like starlight given form. She'd caught her reflection in a stream and nearly shifted back from shock. Her wolf was smaller than most, built for speed rather than power, but it was the eyes that made her freeze. They glowed with an inner light, silver as her fur, and when she looked at the forest around her, everything was different. She could see the currents of wild magic flowing through the trees like veins of light. Could hear the earth's heartbeat, louder now, insistent. Could feel the connections between every living thing, a web so complex and beautiful it made her chest ache. This was what her grandmother had been afraid of. This was what she'd spent Kaya's whole life trying to suppress. She'd shifted back and run home, finding Nara waiting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, her face grave. Silver was all she'd said. Kaya had nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Nara had pulled her inside, sat her down, and finally told her the truth. Or at least part of it. About the old bloodlines. About the silver flame wolves who'd been hunted to extinction. About the power that ran through Kaya's veins, the same power that had gotten her mother killed when Kaya was too young to remember. "They'll know the moment you shift in front of them," Nara had said. "The ceremony next week, you can't attend. We'll say you're sick. That your wolf isn't ready. And you can never, ever let anyone see your true form. Promise me." Another promise. Another piece of herself she had to hide. Kaya had kept that promise for 6 years. Told everyone her wolf was too weak to shift reliably, that something was wrong with her, that she was defective. Let them pity her or mock her or avoid her. It was safer than the alternative. Until the night they came for her anyway. She still didn't know what had triggered it. What had finally made them suspect. She'd been so careful, so controlled. Never healed anyone where it could be noticed. Never let the power surface. Never shifted when anyone could see. But somehow they'd known. The third piece, the final piece, came from her cousin's eyes the night of the branding. Kieran had become alpha 2 months earlier when his father died in a challenge. He'd been overwhelmed, struggling under the weight of leadership, and Kaya had tried to help him however she could. They'd been close once, before responsibility and fear drove wedges between them. When he'd walked into her room with the council behind him, she'd thought maybe there was a mistake. That he'd come to warn her about something, to ask for her help with pack business. Then she'd seen his face. Seen the resignation there, the grim determination. And she'd known. "Kieran," she'd said. "What's happening?" He hadn't answered. Hadn't even looked at her as the council tore her room apart, searching for evidence of crimes she hadn't committed. They'd found her grandmother's journals, hidden beneath a floorboard. Found the careful records Nara had kept of their bloodline, the warnings she'd written, the truths she'd been too afraid to speak aloud. The head counselor, a bitter old wolf named Garrick who'd hated Nara for reasons Kaya never understood, had held up the journals like they were proof of treason. The Silver Flame bloodline, he'd announced to the gathered pack. Living among us. Hiding in plain sight. A threat to everything we've built. The crowd had murmured, uncertain. Most of them didn't even know what that meant. The old bloodlines were legends, stories to scare children. But the council knew, and they were terrified. "She hasn't done anything wrong," Kaya had pleaded, looking at Kieran. "I've never hurt anyone. I've only tried to help. Your existence is the crime," Garrick had cut her off. "Your bloodline is the threat. The Alpha King's law is absolute. Silver Flame wolves were to be eliminated. Eradicated. For the safety of all packs. Then kill me." The words had come out steadier than she'd felt. "If that's the law, then enforce it." Garrick had smiled, and it was the coldest expression she'd ever seen. "We can't. Your packborn and Alpha Kieran refuses to authorize an execution without proof of active treason." His gaze had slid to her cousin, contemptuous. "But we can make sure you're never a threat. Never able to access the power you carry. Never able to spread your corrupted bloodline." That's when they'd brought out the iron rod. When they'd explained what the brand would do. How it would seal away her wolf, suppress her power, mark her as untouchable so no alpha would ever risk claiming her. And Kieran had let them. She'd caught his eye once, just before the iron touched her skin. She'd seen the conflict there, the war between duty and love. She'd hoped, that maybe he'd stop it. That blood would mean more than fear. But he'd turned away. And the iron had burned, and her world had ended. Lying in Ronan's bed, Kaya pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the hollow ache where the pack bond used to be. She'd lost everything that night. Her name. Her place. Her family. Even her sense of self. Until Ronan found her and gave her something she'd never expected. A choice. He could have killed her. By every law his grandfather had written, every precedent his bloodline had set, he should have executed her the moment he discovered what she was. Instead, he'd marked her. Claimed her. Chosen her over duty, over dynasty, over everything he'd been raised to believe was sacred. The door opened quietly, and Kaya didn't need to look to know it was him. The bond hummed, recognizing his presence, settling something restless in her chest. Ronan crossed the room with that same careful control, like he was afraid any sudden movement might spook her. He'd been giving her space since their conversation, staying away except to check on her healing. Trying, she realized, to let her adjust to captivity that didn't feel like captivity, to a mate bond she'd never asked for with a male she'd been taught to fear. "Can't sleep." His voice was low, roughened by exhaustion. "Can you?" A hint of a smile tugged at his mouth. "No." He settled into the chair near the fireplace, maintaining distance, and for a while they just existed in companionable silence. The fire crackled. Wind howled outside the stone walls. And the bond stretched between them, a golden thread neither of them could cut. "Tell me about her," Ronan said finally. "Your grandmother." Kaya blinked, surprised. "Why?" "Because she kept you alive when my grandfather would have seen you dead." Because she was brave enough to hide you in plain sight for 21 years. Because he paused, his gaze intense. Because I need to understand who you are. Not the bloodline. Not the power. You. Something in Kaya's chest cracked. When was the last time someone had wanted to know her? Not what she could do for them, not what threat she posed, just her? She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping the furs around her like armor. She was terrifying, Kaya said, and found herself almost smiling at the memory. 4 feet tall and mean as a viper when she wanted to be. No one argued with her. Not even the alpha. She sounds formidable. She was. But she was also kind. Gentle when it mattered. Kaya's throat tightened. She taught me everything. How to read the forest, how to brew medicines, how to survive in a world that wanted me dead. She gave up everything to keep me safe. Never bonded, never had more children, spent her whole life hiding what she was so I might have a chance. And they still found out. They always find out. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. No matter how careful you are, how small you make yourself, eventually the truth surfaces. You can't hide what you are forever. Ronan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze never leaving her face. Maybe you're not supposed to hide it. Maybe that's the real crime, not what you are, but what they tried to make you. Kaya shook her head. You don't understand. The power, it's not safe. I've felt it. When it surfaces, it's wild. Uncontrollable. The kind of thing that could hurt people without meaning to. Or heal them. I barely know how to use it. So learn. He said it like it was simple. Like rewriting everything she'd been taught was as easy as deciding to. What if I can't control it? The fear she'd been holding back finally broke through. What if the seal breaks and the power destroys everything? What if they were right to seal me, and you just... Kaya. Ronan was across the room before she could blink, kneeling beside the bed, his hand covering hers. Listen to me. I have spent my entire life enforcing laws built on fear. I've executed wolves for crimes they committed just trying to survive. I've upheld a system designed to crush anything that threatened the established order. And it's all been a lie. His hand tightened on hers. The silver flame bloodline wasn't destroyed because it was dangerous. It was destroyed because it was free. Because it couldn't be controlled or dominated or forced into hierarchy. My grandfather didn't kill them to protect anyone. He killed them because they threatened his power. Kaya stared at him, seeing the truth burning in his eyes. So no, Ronan continued, his voice fierce. They weren't right to seal you. They were cowards. And when that seal breaks, when your power surfaces, I will stand beside you and help you learn to wield it. Not suppress it. Not hide it. Own it. The bond flared between them, bright and burning, and Kaya felt something shift in her chest. A wall she'd built to protect herself beginning to crumble. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk everything for me? Ronan's free hand lifted to her face, his touch devastatingly gentle. Because the moment I saw you in that clearing, dying and defiant and still fighting, I finally understood what I've been searching for. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. Not a mate. Not a bond. But a reason to burn it all down and build something better. And Kaya, who'd spent her entire life making herself smaller, quieter, less than what she was, finally let herself believe that maybe, she was worth fighting for. The brand pulsed once, twice. And deep beneath it, the silver flame stirred, recognizing truth when it heard it. 3 days later, Ronan took her into the heart of the Shadowlands. Kaya was strong enough to walk now, though the brand still pulsed with every step, reminding her of the seal that hadn't yet shattered but was fracturing more with each passing hour. She could feel it in her dreams, cracks spreading like ice across glass, and beneath them, something vast and ancient pressing against the barriers, patient and inexorable. It would break soon. They both knew it. Ronan led her through forest so old the trees had grown into twisted shapes that seemed almost deliberate, their branches forming archways and their roots creating passages through the earth. This wasn't the manicured territory near his stronghold, where patrols kept the paths clear and the wild things at bay. This was deeper, older. The kind of place where the boundary between the physical world and something else grew thin enough to step through if you weren't careful. He hadn't told her where they were going. Just appeared at her door before dawn with supplies and a look that said he wouldn't take no for an answer. She'd followed, partly because the bond made it almost physically painful to be separated from him for long, and partly because staying in that room one more day would have driven her mad. The silence between them was comfortable now. They'd spent the last 3 nights talking about her grandmother, about his childhood raised to be a weapon his father could wield, about the weight of carrying bloodlines neither of them had chosen. She'd learned that Ronan hated lavish ceremonies, that he had a scar across his ribs from a challenge when he was 16, that he'd been searching for her because an old seer had told him 5 years ago that his mate would be the key to either saving his kingdom or destroying it. He'd chosen to find her anyway. Chosen the possibility of destruction over the certainty of a loveless political bond. That knowledge did something to her. Made the walls she'd built around her heart feel less necessary. The forest opened into a ravine, steep-sided and narrow, with a stream running through the bottom that caught the early light and threw it back in silver fragments. Ronan descended first, finding handholds in the rock face with the ease of someone who'd made this climb before. Kaya followed, her body stronger than it had been in the clearing, but still recovering, still adjusting to the constant push and pull of the bond and the seal's slow deterioration. At the bottom, the ravine curved sharply, and tucked into that curve was an entrance. Not a cave, exactly. More like a wound in the earth itself, an opening framed by stones too precisely placed to be natural. Symbols covered every surface, spirals and crescents, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when she looked at them directly, script in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow felt she should. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. This place was old. Older than the Purge. Older than Pack Law. Old enough that the air itself felt different, charged with something that made her skin prickle and the thing beneath her brand stir with recognition. Ronan paused at the entrance, his hand resting on one of the carved stones. When he looked back at her, his expression was unreadable. "This is the last shrine of the Silver Flame bloodline," he said quietly. "The only one my grandfather didn't destroy." Kaya's breath caught. Why not? Because he couldn't. Ronan's jaw tightened. He tried. Brought his most powerful wolves, his best fighters. The shrine killed 3 of them before they even reached the entrance. After that, he declared it forbidden territory and tried to erase it from every record, every map. Made speaking of it punishable by death. Then how do you know about it? My mother told me. Something painful flickered across his face. Before she died, she brought me here. Said that if I was going to wear a crown built on genocide, I at least needed to understand what was destroyed to forge it. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Kaya had assumed Ronan was like every other alpha, content with the power structure, willing to maintain it through force. But his mother had planted seeds of doubt decades ago, and they'd been growing in the dark ever since. He stepped through the entrance, and after a moment's hesitation, Kaya followed. The passage was narrow, the walls close enough that her shoulders almost brushed stone on both sides. The symbols carved here were deeper, more elaborate, and they glowed faintly with a light that had no visible source. Bioluminescent moss, maybe, or some trick of the filtered sunlight. Except the light was silver, pure and cold, and it pulsed in rhythm with something Kaya could feel but not hear. A heartbeat. The Earth's heartbeat, the same one her grandmother had taught her to listen for. The passage descended, spiraling down into the earth in a pattern that felt intentional. Sacred geometry, her grandmother would have called it. The kind of structure designed to focus power, to create resonance between the physical and the spiritual. Kaya's hand drifted to her shoulder, pressing against the brand through her shirt. It was burning now, not painfully but intensely, like it recognized this place and was reacting to it. The seal pulsed in counterpoint to the earth's heartbeat, and she could feel them fighting ancient magic against blood magic, creation against suppression. The passage opened suddenly into a chamber. Kaya stopped in the entrance, her breath stolen by what lay before her. The chamber was vast, far larger than should have been possible this deep underground. The ceiling soared overhead, lost in shadows that the silver light couldn't quite penetrate. The walls were covered floor to ceiling in carvings, not just symbols now, but images. Stories told in stone, depicting wolves that moved like liquid silver, their form shifting between human and animal and something in between. They danced and fought and healed and destroyed, and around them the world bent, responding to their will like reality itself was negotiable. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, carved from a single piece of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And behind the altar, rising from floor to ceiling, was a statue. A wolf. Massive, maybe 3 times the size of any living shifter, rendered in stone that had been inlaid with veins of actual silver. The craftsmanship was beyond anything Kaya had ever seen, every hair individually carved, every muscle defined with anatomical precision. But it was the eyes that made her chest tighten. They were made of crystal or diamond, something that caught the ambient light and threw it back with an intensity that made them seem alive. Those eyes were fixed on the entrance. On her. Ronan stood to the side, watching her reaction with an expression she couldn't quite read. He'd been here before, but this was clearly her moment. Her pilgrimage. Kaya moved forward without consciously deciding to, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. Her footsteps echoed in the vast space, each one seeming to resonate with the chamber itself. The closer she got to the altar, the stronger the pull became, until it felt less like she was walking and more like she was being pulled by invisible threads. The brand flared hot enough to make her gasp. She stumbled, catching herself against the altar's edge, and the moment her skin touched the black stone, the world exploded into light. Not physical light. Something else. Vision or memory or prophecy, she couldn't tell. Images flooded her mind in a torrent too fast to process individually, a cascade of moments both past and future tangling together. She saw wolves with silver eyes standing on a cliff, their voices raised in song that made the stars burn brighter. Saw cities of stone and wood burning while those same wolves tried to shield the innocent, their power manifesting as barriers of pure light. Saw a man with pale eyes and a crown of iron giving the order, watched as his armies swept through the territories, methodical and merciless. The Purge. She was seeing the Purge. The vision shifted, time accelerating. She saw her grandmother as a young woman, barely 20, running through a forest with a baby clutched to her chest. Saw her cross into new territory, saw her bury everything she was to become small and forgettable. Saw her raise that baby, Kaya's mother, in hiding, always watching, always afraid. And then she saw her mother die. Saw the moment her power surfaced during childbirth, saw the healers' faces shift from concern to horror. Saw them send for the Alpha, saw the whispered conversations, the fear spreading like poison. Saw Nara appear in the doorway, see what was happening, and make a choice. The vision showed Nara holding her newborn granddaughter, looking at the silver mark on her hip, and understanding with terrible clarity what it meant. Showed her going to the Alpha, a different Alpha, Kieran's grandfather, and striking a bargain. Silence about what the baby was in exchange for service. Her skills, her knowledge, her complete loyalty. The Alpha had agreed. And Nara had spent the next 21 years making sure no one looked too closely at the girl she raised. The vision accelerated again, and now Kaya was seeing things that hadn't happened yet. Couldn't have happened yet. She saw herself standing in this very chamber, the brand gone, her skin unmarked and glowing with inner light. Saw power rising from her like smoke, like flame, silver and devastating and beautiful. Saw Ronan beside her, his hand in hers, their bond visible as threads of light connecting them. And then she saw what came after. War. The packs fracturing, old alliances breaking, wolves choosing sides. She saw Ronan's council turning against him, saw armies gathering at his borders, saw cities burning, not from her power this time, but from the conflict her very existence ignited. But woven through the destruction was something else. New growth. Wolves who'd been suppressed finding their voices. Old magics surfacing in bloodlines everyone thought were mundane. The rigid hierarchy crumbling, and in its place, something more fluid, more free. The vision showed her a future where the packs no longer existed as they had, where power wasn't concentrated in alpha bloodlines, but distributed, where the silver flame wolves walked openly and the wild magic flowed through the world again. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. And it would cost everything. The vision released her, and Kaya collapsed against the altar, gasping. Her whole body shook, sweat coating her skin despite the chamber's cool air. The brand burned like someone had pressed fresh iron to her flesh, and she could feel the seal cracking, major fissures spreading through the blood magic that had held for weeks. Ronan was there instantly, his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. "What did you see?" His voice was tight with concern. Kaya couldn't answer. Couldn't find words for the enormity of what had just been shown to her. She turned instead, looking up at the statue, and for the first time noticed the inscription carved into the altar's base. The script was the same one covering the walls, but now somehow she could read it. "When the last daughter rises, marked by those who fear her, the old ways will wake. She will carry the flame that cannot be extinguished, and her choice will reshape the world. Through her, the bound will break free. Through her, the wild will remember itself. But the price of awakening is always blood, and the question is not whether she will burn, but what she chooses to burn with her." The words settled over her like a prophecy and a curse wrapped together. Last daughter. She was the last of the silver flame bloodline, the only one left carrying the full weight of that ancient power. And the vision had shown her exactly what that meant, not just personal destiny, but a catalyst for transformation so massive it would shatter the world as it currently existed. "There's more," Ronan said quietly, and she realized he was looking at a different section of the altar. She followed his gaze and found another inscription, smaller, carved into the side facing the statue. "The moon bonds true mates not by chance, but by necessity. She who carries the flame and he who wears the crown, their union is the key. Together they will face the choice, preserve the dynasty or birth the new world. Love will be their weapon and their wound. Trust will be their shield and their sacrifice. And when the moment comes, only those brave enough to die for what they believe will survive what's born." Kaya's hands clenched against the stone. The prophecy wasn't just about her. It was about them. About the bond that had snapped into place in that frozen clearing, the mate connection that should have been impossible but was exactly, precisely what the moon had intended. She looked at Ronan, found him already watching her with those pale, intense eyes. "You knew," she said. "The seer who told you about your mate, she told you about this, didn't she?" "Some of it." His jaw was tight. "She said my mate would be Silver Flame. That finding her would mean choosing between duty and destiny. That the kingdom would burn either way, but at least with her, there was a chance something better would rise from the ashes. And you came looking anyway." "I had to." His hand lifted to her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Because I've spent my entire life watching the kingdom rot from the inside. Watching wolves suffer under laws designed to maintain power rather than serve people. I love my territory, my wolves, but the system," he broke off, frustration clear in every line of his body. "It's broken, Kaya. Has been since the beginning. Built on fear and genocide and the lie that hierarchy is natural. That some wolves are born to rule and others born to submit. And you think I can fix it?" The laugh that escaped her was brittle. "I can barely control my own power. I don't even know what I am, not really. The vision showed us, but I don't understand how. You're not supposed to fix it alone." Ronan stepped closer, his presence grounding her. "The prophecy says together. We face this together. Kaya wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she wasn't just a catalyst for destruction, that there was purpose in the chaos the vision had shown. But doubt sat heavy in her chest, the same doubt that had kept her small and hidden her entire life. What if I'm not strong enough? The words came out small, vulnerable. What if the seal breaks and I can't control what comes out? The vision showed power, but it also showed war. People dying. Everything burning. Change always burns. Ronan's voice was fierce. That's not your fault. That's the world resisting evolution. And yes, there will be wolves who fight to keep things as they are, who'd rather maintain a corrupt system than risk the unknown. But there will also be wolves who've been waiting their entire lives for someone to light the match. He turned her to face the statue, his hands on her shoulders. Look at her. Really look. Kaya did. Looked at the massive silver wolf carved with such reverence, such care. This wasn't a monument to a monster or a threat. This was a shrine to something sacred. Something worth preserving even in secret, even under pain of death. Your ancestors weren't destroyed because they were evil, Ronan said quietly. They were destroyed because they were free. Because they couldn't be controlled. Because they represented a world where power wasn't about dominance, but about balance. Where wolves worked with the wild magic instead of trying to subjugate it. His grip tightened slightly. My grandfather killed them because he was afraid. Afraid that if wolves saw there was another way to live, another way to be, they'd reject his rule. And he was right to be afraid, because that's exactly what would have happened. Kaya stared at the statue, at those crystal eyes that seemed to look straight through her, and felt something shift in her chest. Not the brand cracking, something deeper. A change in perspective. She'd spent her entire life thinking of her power as a curse. As something shameful that needed to be hidden. But what if that was just another lie? What if the real curse was the suppression, the hiding, the constant diminishment of herself? What if her power wasn't the problem, but the system that feared it? The thought was radical enough to be terrifying. But standing in this sacred space, surrounded by the preserved history of her people, feeling the earth's heartbeat resonate with the thing sealed inside her, Kaya couldn't deny it anymore. She wasn't broken. She was exactly what she was supposed to be. And the world that called her a threat was the thing that needed to change. The brand pulsed, hard enough to make her gasp, and she felt another crack spread through the seal. Close now. So close. Maybe days. Maybe hours. The blood magic was failing, unable to hold back the tide of what she carried. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper in the vast chamber. I know. Ronan's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing. I am too. The honesty steadied her. He wasn't pretending to have all the answers, wasn't promising it would be easy. Just that they'd face it together. Kaya turned back to the altar, laying her free hand against the black stone. This time there was no vision, just a sense of recognition. Of welcome. Like the shrine itself was acknowledging her, claiming her as one of its own. She felt the bond with Ronan flare, bright and certain, weaving itself through the acknowledgement. Two threads becoming one. The last daughter of the Silver Flame and the Alpha King who chose to stand with her instead of against her. Together, they would face what came next. Together, they would burn the broken world down. And maybe they'd be strong enough to ensure something better rose from the ashes. The statue's crystal eyes caught the light, throwing silver reflections across the chamber walls, and for just a moment, Kaya could have sworn she saw the stone wolf's chest rise and fall. Like somewhere deep in the magic that saturated this place, the silver flame still breathed, waiting for the last daughter to finally set it free. They weren't alone when they emerged from the ravine. Kaya felt them before she saw them, a disturbance in the forest's natural rhythm, the sudden silence of birds that had been singing moments before, the awareness that crawled up her spine like fingers of ice. Ronan felt it too. His whole body went rigid, one arm extending to keep her behind him as his gaze swept the tree line. Wolves. At least a dozen, ranged in a loose semicircle around the ravine's exit. All in human form, all perfectly still, watching with the kind of patience that spoke of training and discipline. They wore the dark leather and fur that marked them as Shadowland warriors, Ronin's elite guard, but something about their positioning felt wrong. Hostile. The one in the center stepped forward, and Kaya recognized the stance of authority even before she saw his face. He was older, maybe 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and scars crisscrossing his exposed forearms. His eyes were hard, chips of flint in a weathered face, and when they landed on her, the contempt was unmistakable. Ronin's hand clenched into a fist. One word, low and dangerous: Garrick. The name hit Kaya like a physical blow. Garrick. The same name as the counselor from her pack, the one who'd held up her grandmother's journals like evidence of treason, who'd ordered the brand with barely concealed satisfaction. It couldn't be the same wolf. Her pack's Garrick had been ancient, and this one looked younger, harder. But the coincidence made her stomach twist. Garrick inclined his head, the gesture just respectful enough to avoid outright insubordination. Alpha King. We've been searching for you. I wasn't aware I needed to report my movements to you. Ronin's voice was cold, edged with authority that made even Kaya want to submit, and she wasn't even the one being addressed. Under normal circumstances, no. Garrick's gaze slid past Ronin to fix on Kaya, and his lip curled. But when the Alpha King disappears for 3 days with an unmarked female of unknown origin, the council grows concerned. Unknown origin. The lie was deliberate, Kaya realized. They knew exactly what she was. Why else would they be here, radiating hostility like heat from a forge? Ronin shifted, blocking Garrick's line of sight to her. My movements are not the council's concern. Neither is my choice of companion. Companion. Garrick tasted the word like it was poison. Is that what we're calling her? The warriors behind him tensed, hands drifting toward weapons. Not drawn yet, but the threat was clear. Kaya's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd seen this before, the careful positioning, the controlled aggression, the way they were boxing them in without making it obvious. This wasn't a patrol. This was an intervention. You will speak of her with respect, Ronin said, each word dropping like stones, or you will not speak at all. For a moment, the forest held its breath. The tension stretched taut enough to snap, and Kaya could feel the power radiating from Ronin, the alpha dominance that made lesser wolves bare their throats. Most of the warriors shifted uncomfortably, eyes dropping, unable to hold his gaze. But Garrick didn't back down. Respect, he repeated, and now there was something almost pitying in his expression. My king, I have served your bloodline for 30 years. Served your father before you, and your grandfather before him. I have always given counsel in the best interest of the throne, even when that counsel was difficult to hear. Then counsel me now, Ronin said, the challenge clear. Garrick drew himself up. Send her away. Whatever claim you think you have on this female, whatever attachment you've formed, break it. Now, before the damage becomes irreparable. The brand on Kaya's shoulder pulsed, hot and vicious, like it recognized the threat in Garrick's words. She pressed her hand against it, trying to suppress the reaction, but the seal was too fractured. Power leaked through the cracks, raising the hair on her arms, making the air around her taste like ozone before a lightning strike. Garrick's eyes narrowed, tracking the movement. She's marked. Branded. He said it like an accusation. Do you even know what she is, my king? What you've brought into your stronghold? I know exactly what she is. Ronin's voice was quiet now, more dangerous than when he'd been shouting. The question is how you know. The words hung in the air, loaded with implication. Kaya saw the moment Garrick realized his mistake, the flicker of calculation behind his eyes as he recalibrated his approach. We have sources, he said carefully. The northern packs are not as isolated as they believe. When one of them brands and exiles a wolf carrying a forbidden bloodline, word travels. You had her marked. Ronin took a step forward, and the warriors behind Garrick actually flinched. You knew what she was before I did. You're the ones who ordered her pack to seal her power and throw her out to die. It wasn't a question. Kaya stared at Ronan's back, her mind racing. He'd figured it out. Somehow, in the 3 days they'd spent together, he'd pieced together the conspiracy. That her branding wasn't random, wasn't her own pack's decision. It had come from here. From his council. From the same wolves who now stood in judgment, demanding he cast her aside. Garrick's expression hardened. We did what was necessary to protect the throne. The Silver Flame bloodline is a threat. To your power, Ronan cut him off. Not to the throne. Not to the people. Just to the council that spent the last 100 years maintaining control through fear and suppression. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Ronan's voice rose, filling the clearing. I know that you've been lying to me my entire life. That the purge wasn't about protection, it was about genocide. That every law I've enforced, every execution I've carried out for harboring forbidden bloodlines, was built on a foundation of murder and terror. One of the younger warriors made a sound, quickly stifled. Kaya could see the shock rippling through the group, the way some of them were looking at Garrick with new uncertainty. This wasn't common knowledge, she realized. Most of them had believed the propaganda, the carefully crafted history that painted the purge as necessary. But Garrick's face had gone cold, all pretense of deference dropping away. Your grandfather understood what you clearly don't, he said, his voice hard. Power requires sacrifice. Stability demands difficult choices. The Silver Flame wolves would have torn the pack system apart. Good. The word cracked through the clearing like a whip. Several warriors actually stepped back, shock clear on their faces. Kaya's breath caught. Ronan had just committed treason against his own legacy, against everything his bloodline had built. For her. Garrick's hand went to the blade at his hip. You don't mean that. I do. Ronan spread his hands, empty of weapons, but somehow more dangerous because of it. The pack system is broken, Garrick. Has been since the beginning. Built on the lie that some wolves are born to rule and others born to serve. That power flows from dominance instead of consent. That anything different, anything free, is a threat that needs to be destroyed. You're talking about anarchy. I'm talking about choice. Ronan's gaze swept across the assembled warriors. About wolves being allowed to live according to their nature instead of forced into a hierarchy that serves the few at the expense of the many. About dismantling a system that requires genocide to maintain itself. Kaya could see them wavering. The younger ones especially, wolves who'd probably grown up questioning the old ways, but never had permission to say it aloud. They were looking at Ronan with something like hope, like maybe their alpha king was finally saying what they'd been too afraid to think. But Garrick saw it too, and the calculation in his eyes turned to something uglier. Desperation. She's corrupted you, he said, pointing at Kaya. That's what the Silver Flame does. They seduce, manipulate, twist minds until you can't tell truth from lies. Your grandfather knew. My grandfather was a murderer. Ronan's voice was flat, final. And you helped him. You and the rest of the old council, you systematically hunted down and executed wolves whose only crime was being born different. You built an empire on their bones and called it justice. We built stability. Garrick's control finally cracked. We created a world where wolves could live without fear of wild magic tearing reality apart, where children could grow up safe. Safe. Kaya's voice cut through the clearing, surprising herself as much as everyone else. She stepped out from behind Ronan, ignoring his protective instinct. Is that what you call branding a wolf without trial? Burning a seal into her flesh that slowly kills her? Forcing her into exile to die alone in the cold? Garrick's gaze snapped to her, and the hatred there was visceral. You have no voice here, abomination. She has every right to speak, Ronan snarled, but Kaya pressed on. You talk about stability and safety, but what you mean is control. The brand burned hotter, the seal fracturing further, and she could feel power starting to leak through in earnest now. The air around her shimmered. You're so terrified of anything you can't dominate that you'd rather destroy it than learn to coexist with it. Your power is chaos. My power is freedom. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere that sounded like her grandmother's voice layered over her own. And that's what really scares you. Because if wolves knew they had a choice, if they understood they didn't have to submit to alpha dominance, your entire system would crumble. One of the warriors, a young female with scars on her neck that looked like they came from a discipline collar, took a step forward. Her voice was quiet but clear. Is it true? About the purge. Garrick rounded on her. Silence. Answer her, Ronan commanded, and the weight of alpha authority behind the words made even Garrick hesitate. Tell her the truth, Garrick. Tell all of them what my grandfather did. What you helped him do. The old warrior's face twisted with fury and something else. Fear. Because the truth was coming out, had been coming out since the moment Ronan found Kaya in that clearing, and no amount of threats or intimidation could stop it now. The silver flame bloodline was a disease, Garrick said finally, his voice hard. They rejected pack bonds, refused alpha dominance, spread their corruption to any wolf weak enough to listen. They would have destroyed everything we built. They offered an alternative, the young female interrupted, and now others were nodding, whispering. That's not the same as corruption. You don't understand what you're saying. We understand perfectly. Another warrior, older, but with the same questioning look in his eyes. You're admitting that the purge was about eliminating choice. About forcing every wolf into a system that benefits the ruling class. Kaya watched the group fracture in real time. Half the warriors were looking at Garrick with dawning horror, understanding finally clicking into place. The other half had drawn weapons, loyal to the old ways, to the council, to the lie they'd built their identities on. This was it. The moment the vision had shown her. Not armies clashing yet, but the first crack, the initial split that would eventually break the kingdom apart. Garrick saw it too. His hand tightened on his blade, and when he looked at Kaya, she saw murder in his eyes. You should have died in that clearing, he said quietly. We made the brand strong enough to kill you within days. The fact that you're still breathing means he marked you. His gaze cut to Ronan. You claimed her, bonded her, tied your fate to hers. Yes. Ronan didn't hesitate, didn't equivocate. Just stood there with absolute certainty radiating from every line of his body. Then you've committed treason against your own bloodline. Garrick drew his blade, and half the warriors followed suit. And the penalty is death. Everything happened at once. The loyal warriors surged forward. Ronan shifted partially, claws extending, power flooding the clearing with enough force to make the trees shake. The rebels, because that's what they were now, moved to intercept their former comrades, and suddenly the forest was full of snarling wolves and clashing bodies. Kaya stumbled back, her shoulder screaming as the brand reacted to the violence. Power surged beneath the seal, desperate to break free, to defend, to destroy. She pressed both hands to the mark, trying to hold it in, but the cracks were spreading too fast. Garrick broke through the melee, moving with the speed and precision of a warrior who'd been fighting for decades. His blade flashed toward Ronan's throat. Ronan caught his wrist, their weapons locked, pushing against each other with strength that would have shattered a normal wolf's bones. Stand down, Ronan snarled. Never. Garrick twisted, bringing a knife up with his free hand, aiming for Ronan's ribs. Kaya reacted without thinking. Power exploded from her hands, silver light that hit Garrick like a physical force and sent him flying backward. He crashed into a tree hard enough to crack the trunk, slumping to the ground, alive but unconscious. The clearing went silent. Every eye turned to her hands, still glowing with silver fire. To the brand on her shoulder, visible now through her shirt where the fabric had burned away, cracks of light spreading through the scarred tissue like lightning through dark clouds. The seal was breaking. Right here. Right now. And everyone could see it. One of the loyal warriors raised a crossbow, the bolt aimed straight at Kaya's heart. Ronan moved faster than should have been possible, positioning himself between them, but the warrior's finger was already on the trigger. A howl split the air, so loud and powerful it made the earth tremble. Everyone froze, wolves and warriors alike, instinct overriding training. That howl carried alpha dominance magnified beyond anything Kaya had ever felt, authority so absolute it made submission feel involuntary. Through the trees came a figure that made Garrick look small by comparison. Massive, easily 7 feet tall, built like violence given form. His hair was white despite a face that couldn't have been more than 60, and his eyes were pale gray, almost colorless. He wore furs and leather that looked ceremonial, ancient, and power radiated from him in waves that made the air itself feel heavy. Kaya knew who he was before Ronan spoke, before she saw the way every warrior in the clearing dropped to one knee, even the rebels. Theron, Ronan's father, the former Alpha King. He swept the scene with those colorless eyes, the fallen Garrick, the fractured warriors, the power still glowing faintly around Kaya's hands, his son standing in front of her like a shield. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly quiet, but it carried absolute authority. Ronan, step away from the female. It wasn't a request. It was a command backed by decades of dominance, by the weight of bloodline and tradition. Ronan didn't move. No. Theron's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. That is not a request from your father. It is an order from your king. You abdicated, Ronan said, his voice steady despite the tension radiating through his body. You don't get to give me orders anymore. I abdicated the throne, not my authority over you. Theron took a step closer. And I certainly didn't abdicate my responsibility to protect this bloodline from threats, even when that threat has seduced my son. She hasn't seduced anyone. She bears the silver flame. Theron's voice hardened. I can smell it on her, see it in the way reality bends around her. You've bonded her, claimed her, tied our entire dynasty to the very bloodline we spent a century eliminating. Kaya felt the weight of his attention fix on her, and it took everything she had not to drop to her knees like the warriors. This was the wolf who'd continued his father's genocide, who'd hunted the silver flame to near extinction, who'd ordered her grandmother's family slaughtered and only let Nara live because she was valuable enough to be exploited. He could kill her with a thought. And from the calculation in his eyes, he was seriously considering it. If you touch her, Ronan said, very quietly, I will kill you. The clearing went deathly silent. Threatening the former Alpha King was treason of the highest order. Threatening your own father was unthinkable. Theron stared at his son, and for the first time, something like emotion crossed his face. Pain, maybe. Or disappointment. She's destroyed you already, he said, and he sounded almost sad. Made you willing to betray everything, your crown, your people, your own blood. This is what the silver flame does. This is why they had to be eliminated. They had to be eliminated because you were afraid, Ronan shot back. Because they represented power you couldn't control, freedom you couldn't contain. Because deep down, you knew that if wolves understood they had a choice, they'd never choose you. Theron's hands clenched. I did what was necessary. You did what was easy. Ronan's voice rose. You murdered innocents and called it protection. You built a dynasty on genocide and called it strength. You raised me to enforce your laws without ever questioning whether they were just. And now you'd throw it all away for her? Theron gestured at Kaya. For a bond that was likely manufactured by her bloodline's magic? For a female you've known for days? Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. Just absolute certainty. Kaya's chest tightened. The bond flared between them, fierce and undeniable, and she felt Ronan's truth like it was her own. He would choose her. Over duty, over dynasty, over everything. And it would cost him everything. Theron saw it too. Saw that his son was lost to him, that no threat or appeal to duty would work. His face went cold, empty of everything except iron determination. Then you leave me no choice. He raised his hand, and the loyal warriors rose as one. Ronan, son of Theron, Alpha King of the Shadowlands, by the authority of our bloodline and the laws you've sworn to uphold, I declare you unfit to rule. You are hereby stripped of your title and authority until such time as you sever the bond with this female and return to your senses." The words hit like a physical blow. Kaya saw Ronan stagger, felt through the bond the visceral pain of having his birthright torn away. This was worse than exile. This was erasure. And the female, Theron continued, his gaze fixing on Kaya with absolute cold, will be taken into custody and held until the council decides her fate. The warriors moved forward, surrounding them. The rebels hesitated, clearly torn, but they were outnumbered and facing the former Alpha King. Even their newfound conviction wasn't enough to overcome that much raw authority. Ronan shifted fully, his wolf massive and dark, positioning himself between Kaya and the advancing warriors. The message was clear. They'd have to go through him. "Don't," Theron said, and now there was genuine pain in his voice. "Don't make me put you down, Ronan. You're my son. I don't want to hurt you." "Then leave," Ronan snarled, his words twisted by the wolf's throat, but still comprehensible. "Take your warriors and go. We'll leave the Shadowlands. You'll never see us again." "You know I can't do that." Theron drew his own blade, ancient steel that had probably tasted silver flame blood before. "The female is too dangerous to let live. And you're too important to let fall." The brand on Kaya's shoulder cracked audibly, a sound like ice breaking. Power flooded through the fissures, more than she could contain, more than the seal could suppress. Her hands ignited with silver fire, spreading up her arms, and she felt her wolf rising for the first time since the branding, felt the seal finally, catastrophically failing. "Run," she gasped, looking at Ronan. "You have to run. When this breaks, I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice." The power was building, pressure behind a crumbling dam. "I can't control it. When the seal shatters, I don't know what will happen, but I won't hurt you. You won't hurt anyone." Ronan shifted back to human, standing before her, his hands framing her face. "I'm right here. Whatever comes out, we face it together." Through the bond, she felt his absolute certainty, his complete trust, and something in Kaya's chest that had been locked tight since the night of her branding finally broke open. "Together," she whispered. The seal shattered. Power exploded outward in a wave of silver light so bright it turned the forest to day. Kaya heard screaming, couldn't tell if it was hers or someone else's, felt her wolf break free after weeks of suppression, felt the wild magic of her bloodline surge through her veins like liquid starlight. When the light faded, she was on her knees, gasping, her body shaking with the aftermath. But she could feel it now, her power, vast and ancient and finally free. It flowed through her like a river finding its course, no longer dammed or diverted or forced into silence. The clearing was empty except for Ronan, who knelt beside her, his hand in hers, their bond blazing between them like a beacon. Everyone else had fled. Even Theron had retreated, though Kaya could feel his presence in the distance, watching, waiting. "It's done," she said, her voice hoarse. "The seal is broken. They'll all know now. They'll come for us." Ronan helped her to her feet, steady despite everything. "Let them come." Kaya looked at him, this Alpha King who'd given up his crown for her, who stood beside her when the whole world demanded he choose them instead. And she felt something shift in her chest. Not fear. Not doubt. Determination. "When they do," she said, her voice stronger now, "we'll be ready." The silver flame burned in her eyes, reflected in his. And somewhere in the distance, war drums began to sound. They ran. Not in panic, not in fear, but with purpose. Ronan led her deeper into the Shadowlands, away from the ravine and the shrine, away from the clearing where the seal had shattered and the world had witnessed what she truly was. He knew these woods better than anyone, knew the hidden paths and secret places where even his father's warriors wouldn't think to look. Kaya followed, her newly freed wolf singing with the joy of movement after weeks of suppression. Everything felt different now. Sharper. More alive. She could feel the wild magic flowing through the forest like veins of light, could sense the consciousness of ancient trees and the small bright sparks of animal life. Her power had settled into her bones like it had always belonged there, like the seal had been the aberration, and this freedom, this connection to everything, was her natural state. But underneath the exhilaration was exhaustion. The seal breaking had taken everything she had, and now that the adrenaline was fading, her body was remembering it had been dying just days ago. Ronan must have sensed it through the bond because he slowed, his hand finding hers, steadying her when she stumbled over a root. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. The bond carried everything: his concern, her determination to keep moving, their shared understanding that stopping too soon meant capture. Death. Or worse. The sun was setting when they finally reached his destination. A cave, but not the rough natural formation Kaya expected. This entrance was carved, the stone shaped by deliberate hands into an archway that bore symbols similar to those in the silver flame shrine. Older though. Cruder. Like whoever made this had been working from memory of something even more ancient. Ronan hesitated at the threshold, something complicated crossing his face. "My mother brought me here," he said quietly. "After she showed me the shrine. This was her sanctuary. The place she came when the crown got too heavy." His jaw tightened. "My father doesn't know it exists." The trust implicit in bringing her here made Kaya's chest ache. He was giving her pieces of himself, showing her the hidden places, the vulnerabilities he kept locked away from everyone else. She stepped through the archway. The cave opened into a space that felt more like a room than a natural formation. The walls were smooth, carved with more of those ancient symbols, and someone, his mother, probably, had made it comfortable. Furs piled in one corner for sleeping. A fire pit ringed with stones, wood already stacked beside it. Shelves carved into the rock holding preserved food, water skins, even a few books so old their leather covers had cracked. A hideaway. A bolt hole. A place to retreat when the world became too much. Ronan moved through the space with familiarity, building a fire with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, flames were crackling, throwing warm light across the stone walls and driving back the evening chill. He worked in silence, and Kaya let him, sensing he needed the simple task to center himself. Everything had changed in that clearing. He defied his father, lost his crown, committed himself to a path that would likely end in war or death or both. And he'd done it without hesitation, without regret, but that didn't mean it wasn't costing him. When the fire was burning steady, Ronan finally looked at her. Really looked, his pale eyes tracking over her like he was cataloging injuries, checking for damage. "Let me see your shoulder," he said. Kaya's hand went instinctively to the place where the brand had been. The skin there felt different now, smooth, unmarked. The seal's destruction had erased the scar tissue completely, like it had never existed. But phantom pains still echoed through her nervous system, a ghost of the agony she'd carried for weeks. She turned her back to him, pulling aside the collar of her ruined shirt to expose her shoulder blade. Ronan's sharp inhale was audible. His fingers touched her skin, feather-light, tracing where the brand had been. "It's gone," he said, wonder in his voice. "Completely healed." The seal breaking must have Kaya's words cut off as heat flooded through the bond, not painful but intense. Ronan's touch on her bare skin was doing things to her nervous system that had nothing to do with healing and everything to do with the mate bond that had been pulling them together since the moment they met. She felt him freeze, felt through the bond that he was experiencing the same reaction. For a moment, neither of them moved, his hand still resting on her shoulder, the contact point between them burning with possibility. Then Ronan withdrew, putting careful distance between them. "You should eat," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Rest. You pushed yourself too hard today." He was right, but part of Kaya mourned the loss of contact. The bond was screaming at her to close the distance, to touch him, to complete the connection that had been interrupted too many times. But she could feel his control, the iron discipline keeping him in check, and she understood. They were alone now. Truly alone, for the first time since he'd found her dying in the snow. No healers nearby, no walls or propriety or duty to act as barriers. Just the two of them, a mate bond pulling them together, and the very real possibility that giving in to it would complicate everything even further. Kaya settled on the furs near the fire, accepting the dried meat and bread Ronan offered. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The bond hummed between them, a constant awareness that was becoming as natural as breathing. Outside, full darkness fell. The cave mouth showed a slice of night sky, stars beginning to emerge, and Kaya found herself staring at them, thinking about her grandmother. About all the nights Nara had taken her into the woods and taught her to read the constellations, to understand the patterns written in the heavens. She would have liked you, Kaya said softly. Ronan looked up from the fire he'd been tending. Your grandmother? Yes. She always said. Kaya's throat tightened. She said the moon put certain wolves in our path for a reason. That nothing was random, especially not the connections that scared us most. Wise woman. Terrifying woman. Kaya smiled despite the grief. But yes, wise. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. I wish she'd told me the truth earlier. About what I was. What I carried. Maybe if I'd known, I could have prepared, could have. You would have been killed sooner, Ronan said flatly. The moment your power surfaced, the moment anyone suspected what you were, they would have found a way to eliminate you. Your grandmother kept you alive by keeping you ignorant. I know. Logically, I know that. Kaya pressed her forehead to her knees. But I keep thinking about all the times I felt broken. Wrong. Like there was something fundamentally damaged about me because I couldn't shift around others, couldn't let my power surface, couldn't be fully myself. Her voice cracked. I spent my whole life thinking I was the problem. The furs rustled as Ronan moved, and then he was beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not quite touching. You're not broken, he said quietly. You never were. You were a wolf in a cage being told the bars were for your own protection. Kaya turned her head, meeting his eyes. In the firelight, they looked molten, almost golden instead of their usual pale silver. And now the cage is gone, and I don't know how to exist without it. The power, it's so much, Ronan. I can feel everything. The earth's heartbeat, the wild magic, the connections between every living thing. It's beautiful and overwhelming, and I don't know how to control it. So don't. She blinked. What? Don't control it. Not yet. Ronan shifted to face her fully. You've spent 21 years suppressing everything you are. Maybe what you need isn't more control. Maybe you need to just be. Let the power flow without trying to direct it or contain it or force it into acceptable shapes. That's dangerous. Being alive is dangerous. His mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so sad. I've spent my entire life controlling everything. Every word, every action, every emotion carefully managed to fit what an alpha king should be. And it's made me hollow. Turned me into something my father could wield like a weapon. He looked away, jaw tight. I don't want that for you. Don't want to watch you hollow yourself out trying to make your power palatable for people who'd fear you no matter what you did. Kaya studied his profile, seeing the cracks in his armor. Tell me about her. Your mother. Ronan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she was kind. Too kind for the world my father created. His voice was distant, lost in memory. She tried to soften him, to make him see that ruling through fear would eventually destroy everything he'd built. He wouldn't listen. Told her she was weak, that compassion had no place in leadership. What happened to her? She died when I was 12. Ronan's hands clenched. Officially, it was an illness. Something sudden that the healers couldn't cure. He paused. I've never been sure that was the whole truth. Kaya's breath caught. You think your father. I think my mother knew things she wasn't supposed to know. About the purge, about the silver flame bloodline, about the real reasons behind the laws she was expected to enforce as queen. His gaze was hard. And I think she was killed for it, one way or another. The pain in his voice was raw, old grief that had never properly healed. Kaya reached out without thinking, her hand finding his. He startled at the contact, looking down at their interlaced fingers like he'd forgotten what comfort felt like. She brought me to the shrine 3 days before she died, Ronan continued, his voice rougher. Told me that if anything happened to her, I needed to remember what I saw there. That the history I'd been taught was a lie, and one day I'd have to choose between maintaining that lie or burning it all down to find the truth underneath. You were 12. She knew she was running out of time. His grip on Kaya's hand tightened. I didn't understand then. Thought she was being dramatic, preparing me for responsibilities I wasn't ready for. But she wasn't talking about ruling. She was talking about this. About the choice I'd have to make when I finally found you. Kaya's heart stuttered. She knew about me? Not you specifically. But she knew the silver flame bloodline hadn't been completely eliminated. Knew that eventually, one of them would surface, and when that happened, I'd have to decide what kind of king I wanted to be. What kind of man? He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made it hard to breathe. I spent 13 years trying to be what my father wanted. Enforcing his laws, maintaining his legacy, telling myself it was necessary. Justified. And then 5 years ago, a seer told me my mate would be Silver Flame. That finding her would mean choosing between duty and destiny. And you went looking anyway. I had to. His free hand lifted, hovering near her face, not quite touching. Because I realized my mother had been right. The system was broken. My father's reign, my grandfather's genocide, it was all built on fear and control and the suppression of anything that couldn't be dominated. And I'd been complicit in maintaining it. You were raised in it, Kaya said softly. You didn't know. I should have questioned it. Should have looked harder at the wolves we executed, the bloodlines we eliminated, the laws we enforced without mercy. His jaw clenched. I have so much blood on my hands, Kaya. Wolves who died because I believed the lie. Because I chose duty over truth. So did I. The words came out before she could stop them. I let them make me small. Let them convince me my power was shameful, that I needed to hide, that being myself was dangerous. I knew it was wrong, felt it every time I suppressed the heat in my hands or refused to shift or made myself forgettable. But I did it anyway because I was afraid. She moved closer, drawn by the bond and something deeper. Understanding. Recognition. We were both in cages, she said. Yours was a crown. Mine was a brand. But they were both designed to make us controllable. Acceptable. Ronan's hand finally made contact, his palm cupping her cheek, thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I don't want to be acceptable anymore, he said, his voice rough. I want to be free. And he cut himself off, conflict clear in his expression. What do you want? Kaya whispered. You. The word was torn from somewhere deep. Everything. Your trust, your truth, your power unfiltered and wild. I want to stand beside you when the world comes for us and know that we're fighting for something worth the cost. I want. He stopped again, and Kaya could feel through the bond what he wasn't saying. The fear underneath the desire. Not of her, but of himself. Of wanting too much, of taking when you should be giving her space to choose. I trust you, she said, and watched his eyes widen. I shouldn't. We've known each other for days, and you're everything I was taught to fear. But I trust you, Ronan. You could have let me die. Could have killed me yourself. Could have rejected the bond and saved your crown. But you didn't. You chose me over everything, and I. Her voice broke. When had someone last chosen her? When had anyone looked at all of her, the power, the danger, the complications, and decided she was worth it? I see you, Ronan said, and his voice carried the weight of a vow. All of you. The girl who healed people even though it risked exposure. The wolf who survived weeks with a seal slowly killing her. The woman who stood in front of my father's warriors and refused to be silent even when it meant death. His forehead dropped to hers, the contact sending electricity through the bond. I see your power and I'm not afraid. I see your scars and I'm honored you'd let me close enough to witness them. I see your fear and your courage and your rage at being caged, and I want all of it. Every piece. The pretty parts and the dangerous parts and the parts you haven't discovered yet. Kaya's breath caught. Her hands lifted, settling on his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing beneath her palms. The bond was screaming at her to close the last few inches between them, to seal this with touch, with claiming, with everything the mate bond was designed to create. But something held her back. One last wall she couldn't quite scale. What if I hurt you? The fear finally escaped. The power, it's so strong, and I barely know how to use it. What if if we... She couldn't finish, but he understood. Then we'll figure it out together. His hands framed her face, holding her gently. I'm not fragile, Kaya. I'm not going to break because your power surfaces. And if it gets overwhelming, if you lose control, then we'll deal with it. But I'm not going to stay away from you because you're afraid of what might happen. You should be afraid. I am. He smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd seen from him, breaking through years of careful control. I'm terrified. Of the war coming, of losing you, of failing to protect you from what's ahead. But I'm not afraid of you. I'm in awe of you. The wall crumbled. Kaya closed the distance, her lips finding his in a kiss that was equal parts desperation and relief and coming home. The bond exploded between them, flooding her system with sensation so intense it bordered on overwhelming. She could feel everything, his surprise melting into hunger, his control fracturing, the fierce joy of finally giving in to what had been pulling them together since that first moment in the clearing. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and she went willingly, her hands tangling in his hair. The kiss deepened, turned into something wild and claiming, and power rose in response. Silver light spilled from her skin, gentle this time, not destructive but celebratory, illuminating the cave like starlight. Ronan pulled back just far enough to look at her, and his expression was pure wonder. You're glowing, he said, his voice rough. The power responds to emotion. I can't, she broke off as he kissed her again, slower this time, deliberate and thorough, and the light pulsed brighter. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kaya rested her forehead against his chest. Through the bond, she could feel his restraint, the iron control keeping him from pushing further when she was still healing, still adjusting to freedom. We should stop, he said, though his arms didn't loosen. I know. She didn't move either. They stayed like that, wrapped together, the bond settled and content in a way it hadn't been since it formed. Outside, the night deepened. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, probably search parties, looking for them. But here, in this hidden sanctuary, they had a moment of peace. Ronan pressed a kiss to her temple, then gently disentangled himself, though he kept one hand linked with hers. He guided her to the pile of furs, settling beside her, their backs against the cave wall. Rest, he said. We have hard days ahead. Kaya leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, their hands still interlaced. The bond hummed between them, warm and certain and right. Tell me something true, she said quietly. Something you've never told anyone. Ronan was silent for a moment, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. I never wanted to be king, he said finally. I wanted to be a healer. Spent my childhood studying herbs and anatomy, learning everything I could about how to put wolves back together instead of tear them apart. His voice was soft with old grief. My father found out when I was 14. Destroyed all my books, told me healing was beneath an alpha. That my only purpose was to rule and dominate and enforce his legacy. Kaya's chest ached for the boy he'd been, for the dream that had been crushed before it could fully form. When this is over, she said, when we've fought whatever war is coming, maybe you could heal again. Maybe that could be part of whatever we build to replace what we burned down. Maybe. He sounded like he didn't quite believe it was possible, but wanted to. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the bond warm between them. Kaya felt her eyes growing heavy, exhaustion finally catching up with her. But for the first time since the branding, since her whole life fell apart, she felt safe enough to sleep. Because she wasn't alone anymore. Kaya, Ronan said softly, and she hummed in acknowledgement. Whatever happens next, whatever my father does, whatever the council plans, whatever war comes, I want you to know something. She lifted her head to look at him. His pale eyes were serious, intense, full of emotion he wasn't quite ready to name, but she could feel pulsing through the bond anyway. You're not a burden. You're not a complication or a problem to be solved. You're my mate, and I chose you. Freely. Completely. And I will keep choosing you every day for as long as we both live. Tears burned at the back of Kaya's eyes. How long had she waited to hear something like that? To be chosen not despite who she was, but because of it? I choose you too, she whispered. I'm still afraid. Still unsure of what I'm doing or how to wield this power. But I choose you, Ronan. Choose us. Whatever that means. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent, and pulled her closer. Then we'll figure out the rest together. Kaya closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the warmth and safety of his embrace. Tomorrow, they'd face the consequences of everything that had happened. Tomorrow, war would come hunting for them. But tonight, they had this. Each other. A bond that couldn't be broken and a choice freely made. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to survive what came next. The silver flame inside her pulsed once, content, and for the first time in her life, Kaya let herself believe she might actually deserve the happiness she'd found. Outside, the night sky wheeled overhead, stars burning cold and bright. And the moon, who'd bound them together, watched over her children as they slept. They had 3 days of peace. 3 days hidden in the cave, learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with destiny or prophecy or war. Kaya discovered that Ronan was terrible at cooking but meticulous about keeping their supplies organized. That he had a scar on his left shoulder from a childhood accident he refused to talk about. That when he slept, the carefully controlled mask slipped away and he looked younger, almost vulnerable. He learned that she hummed without realizing it when she was content. That her power responded to moonlight, making her skin glow silver when she stood in the cave entrance at night. That she had nightmares about the branding, and the only thing that helped was his hand in hers, the bond reminding her she wasn't alone anymore. They didn't talk about what was coming. Didn't plan or strategize or prepare. Just existed in a bubble where the outside world and its demands couldn't quite reach them. It was always going to shatter. Kaya woke on the 4th morning to find Ronan already up, standing at the cave entrance with tension radiating through every line of his body. She knew before she asked that something had changed. They found us, he said quietly. Her heart sank. Your father. Worse. He turned, and his expression was grim. A formal summons. Delivered by a neutral messenger under peace banner. The council is demanding we return for a tribunal. A tribunal. Kaya pushed herself up from the furs. They're putting us on trial. Me on trial. You, his jaw clenched. They're calling it a petition for judgment. Asking me to prove you're not a threat, to demonstrate that the bond isn't compromising my ability to rule. And if you can't? Then they'll invoke the old laws. The ones that allow the council to override an alpha's authority if he's deemed unfit. Ronan's hands curled into fists. They'll take my title permanently and execute you as a threat to the realm. Kaya's stomach twisted. Then we don't go. We run. Cross the southern border, disappear. They have hostages. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? The warriors who stood with us in the clearing. The ones who questioned Garrick, who challenged the old narrative. Ronan's voice was tight with fury and helplessness. They've been arrested for sedition. If we don't appear before the council within 2 days, they'll be executed. Kaya closed her eyes, nausea rising in her throat. Those warriors had risked everything to defend them, to question the lies they'd been told their whole lives. And now they'd pay the price for that courage unless she and Ronan walked into what was almost certainly a trap. It's a setup, she said. I know. They'll kill me the moment we arrive. They'll try. Ronan crossed to her, his hands framing her face. But I won't let them. Whatever happens, whatever they throw at us, we face it together. Like we promised. Kaya wanted to argue, to find another way, but she could see in his eyes that his mind was made up. Those warriors had stood for them, and Ronan wouldn't abandon them to die. It wasn't in his nature, no matter the cost to himself. Together, she agreed, though the word tasted like ash. They left within the hour. The journey back to Ronan's stronghold took a full day, traveling openly on the main roads instead of the hidden paths they'd used to escape. The messenger who'd delivered the summons, a young male who looked terrified to be caught between the council and his displaced Alpha King, led the way, careful to keep distance between them. Kaya felt eyes on them the entire journey. Wolves watching from the tree line, scouts reporting their movements. By the time they reached the stronghold's outer boundaries, a crowd had gathered. Word had spread fast, apparently. The branded exile and the Alpha King who'd chosen her over his crown, returning to face judgment. The hostility in some faces was palpable, fear in others. But there were also wolves who looked at them with something like hope, like maybe Ronan and Kaya represented a crack in the foundation of a system that had oppressed them for generations. The stronghold itself loomed ahead, carved into the mountainside, stone and iron and ancient magic woven together into a fortress that had stood for centuries. Kaya had barely seen it before, had been too weak and disoriented when Ronan first brought her here. Now, seeing it in daylight, understanding what it represented, the seat of power for a dynasty built on genocide, she felt small and exposed. The main gates stood open, warriors lining the entrance. Not Ronan's personal guard, she realized. These bore the insignia of the council, old wolves, loyal to Theron and the way things had always been. They passed through in silence, the crowd following at a distance. Kaya's power stirred beneath her skin, responding to her anxiety, and she had to consciously suppress it. Silver light leaked from her fingertips before she managed to pull it back under control. Ronan's hand found hers, squeezing once, grounding her. The great hall was packed. Kaya stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sheer number of wolves crammed into the massive space. Hundreds of them, maybe more, all turning to look as she and Ronan entered. The council sat at the far end on a raised platform, 7 wolves, all male, all old enough to have served under Ronan's grandfather. And in the center, in the seat that should have been Ronan's, sat Theron. The former Alpha King looked carved from stone, his colorless eyes tracking their approach with an expression Kaya couldn't read. Beside him stood Garrick, recovered from the blow she'd dealt him in the clearing, his face twisted with barely concealed contempt. And to the right, bound in silver chains that suppressed their wolves, knelt the warriors who'd defended them. 12 of them, including the young female who'd questioned Garrick, the male who'd spoken about choice. They looked beaten, exhausted, but their eyes blazed with defiance when they saw Ronan. Ronan, son of Theron. The wolf who spoke was ancient, his voice reedy but carrying absolute authority. Chief Counselor Alaric, Kaya realized. The one who'd served longest, who'd been there for the purge itself. You stand before this tribunal accused of gross dereliction of duty, of compromising the security of the Shadowlands, and of bonding a wolf bearing a forbidden bloodline in direct violation of the laws you swore to uphold. Ronan's spine straightened. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of alpha authority, even stripped of his title. I stand before you guilty of choosing truth over lies, of refusing to perpetuate a genocide my grandfather started and my father continued, of bonding my true mate as is my right under the moon's law, which supersedes any rule written by wolves. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Alaric's expression didn't change. The female. His gaze shifted to Kaya, and she fought the urge to step back. State your name and bloodline. Kaya. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Granddaughter of Nara. Last of the Silver Flame bloodline. More murmurs, louder now. Some wolves shifted nervously. Others leaned forward, hungry for spectacle. And you admit to carrying the forbidden power? Alaric pressed. To being exactly what our laws demand be eliminated? I admit to being what I was born. Kaya lifted her chin. To carrying a bloodline your kings tried to exterminate because it threatened their power. But I've committed no crime. Hurt no one. The only violence done was to me, branded without trial, exiled without mercy, left to die for the sin of existing. Your existence is the crime. Garrick's voice cut through the hall. Your bloodline rejected pack structure, refused alpha dominance, spread chaos wherever they went. My bloodline offered freedom, Kaya shot back, anger overriding fear. The choice to live outside a hierarchy that benefits the few at the expense of the many. That's not chaos. That's liberation. It's anarchy. It's evolution. Ronan's voice cracked like a whip. And you killed thousands of wolves to prevent it because you were terrified of losing control. Alaric raised a hand, silencing Garrick. The purge was necessary to preserve order, to protect the pack system from those who would destroy it. The purge was murder, Ronan said flatly. Systematic execution of innocents whose only crime was being born with power you couldn't dominate. My grandfather built this dynasty on their bones, and you expect me to honor that legacy? To kill my own mate to maintain it? Yes. Theron spoke for the first time, his voice cutting through the noise. The hall went silent. Because you are not just a wolf, Ronan. You are a king. And kings make sacrifices for their people. Father and son stared at each other across the crowded hall, years of conflict and unspoken pain hanging between them. You want me to prove I can rule? Ronan's voice was cold. To show I'm not compromised by the bond? Fine. Ask your questions. Make your demands. But understand this, I will not reject her. I will not kill her. And if that makes me unfit in your eyes, then I was never fit to begin with. Alaric exchanged glances with the other counselors. Very well. The tribunal will proceed. He gestured, and two warriors dragged forward a wolf Kaya didn't recognize, young, terrified, bearing fresh wounds that looked like torture. This wolf was captured at the southern border, Alaric announced. He carries a message from the eastern packs. A warning. He held up a sealed letter. They've heard about the Silver Flame. About her power awakening. And they're demanding we execute her immediately, or they'll consider it an act of war. Kaya's blood ran cold. It was spreading already. Fear of what she represented rippling out through the territories. The Western packs have sent similar demands, another counselor added. As have the Northern Alliance. They're all watching, waiting to see if we'll enforce the old laws or allow a forbidden bloodline to exist openly. Which means, Alaric said, his gaze fixing on Ronan, your choice affects more than just the Shadowlands. If we allow her to live, we risk war with every neighboring territory. Thousands will die because you refuse to do your duty. The trap closed with brutal efficiency. Kaya could feel it, see it in the satisfied expressions on the council's faces. They'd engineered this perfectly, forced Ronan into a position where keeping her meant condemning his people to war, and killing her meant destroying himself through the bond. No matter what he chose, he lost. They're afraid, Kaya said, her voice carrying through the silent hall. All of them. They've built their power on the same lie you have, that dominance is natural, that hierarchy is necessary, that wolves can't be trusted with freedom. And my existence proves it's all false. Your existence proves you're dangerous, Garrick snarled. Look at what you've done, divided our people, turned our king against his own bloodline, brought the threat of war to our borders. Everything we feared about the Silver Flame is coming true. Because you're making it come true. Kaya's power surged, silver light flickering around her hands before she wrestled it back under control. You're so determined to prove I'm a threat that you're creating the very chaos you claim to prevent. You want war? You're manufacturing it. You want division? You're causing it. All to justify the genocide you've already committed. Careful, girl. Alaric's voice was soft, dangerous. You're making their case for them. And Kaya realized with sick clarity that he was right. Every word she spoke, every flash of power, every moment of defiance, it played into their narrative. Proved to the watching crowd that she was exactly what they feared. She was trapped too. I have a proposal. Theron rose from his seat, and the hall went deathly quiet. A way to resolve this that serves everyone's interests. Kaya didn't trust the reasonable tone in his voice. Neither did Ronan, judging by the way his whole body went rigid. The bond between my son and this female is real, Theron continued. That much is clear. And severing it would kill them both. I'm not willing to lose my son, even if he's made poor choices. A concession. Kaya waited for the other shoe to drop. But neither can we allow a silver flame wolf to roam free, spreading her influence, awakening others who might carry dormant bloodlines. Theron's gaze fixed on Kaya. So I propose a compromise. She lives, but contained. We'll create a seal, different from the brand, less destructive, that limits her power's range. She'll be confined to the stronghold, under constant supervision. Ronan can keep his mate, and the other territories will see we've neutralized the threat. Murmurs of approval rippled through the council. It sounded reasonable. Merciful, even. It was a cage dressed up as kindness. No. Ronan's voice was flat. You haven't heard the full terms. I don't need to. Ronan stepped forward. You're proposing to imprison her. To seal her power and lock her away like a dangerous animal. That's not a compromise. That's a slower execution. It's survival, Theron countered. For both of you. She lives. You keep your bond. And the Shadowlands avoid war. Those are the best terms you're going to get. Best terms. Ronan laughed, bitter and harsh. You're offering to cage my mate and expect me to be grateful. I'm offering to save her life. Theron's control cracked, real emotion bleeding through. Every other pack wants her dead, Ronan. Dead. The council wants her executed. Half the wolves in this hall would kill her themselves if I gave the order. This is the only way she survives. Surviving isn't living, Kaya said quietly. Not like that. Theron's gaze shifted to her. Then what do you propose, girl? How do you suggest we resolve this without bloodshed? It was a challenge. A dare. He was betting she had no answer, that the impossibility of the situation would break her. But Kaya thought about her grandmother, about the silver flame wolves who'd been hunted and killed for refusing to submit. About the warriors kneeling in chains because they'd dared to question. About every wolf who'd ever been forced to choose between freedom and safety and told they couldn't have both. You're asking the wrong question, she said. You keep framing this as how to control me, contain me, make me acceptable. But the real question is why you need to control me at all. Because your power is dangerous. My power is free. Silver light flared around her, brighter than before, and this time she didn't suppress it. Let it rise like flame, like starlight, illuminating the hall. It doesn't bow to alpha dominance. Doesn't fit into your hierarchy. And that terrifies you because it means there's another way to be. Another way to live. And if wolves saw that way, really understood it was possible, your entire system would crumble. The light grew brighter, reflecting off stone walls, casting everything in silver shadow. Wolves backed away, fear and awe warring on their faces. So kill me, Kaya continued, her voice rising. Seal me. Cage me. Do whatever you think you have to do to maintain control. But understand that I'm not the real threat. The truth is. And you can't kill that, no matter how many of us you execute. She's right. The voice came from the chained warriors. The young female was on her feet despite the silver burning her wrists. I've spent my whole life believing the purge was necessary. That the old bloodlines were dangerous. But watching this, watching you torture and manipulate and threaten just to maintain power, I finally understand. The system is what's broken, not her. Silence. Garrick moved toward the warriors, hand raised to strike. No. Another warrior stood, chains rattling. Then another. And another. Until all 12 were on their feet, defiance blazing in their eyes despite the silver eating into their skin. We stand with the Alpha King, the young female said. And with his mate. Whatever judgment you pass on them, we share. The crowd erupted. Some wolves shouting in support, others demanding the warrior's execution, still others just confused, looking for someone to tell them what to believe. Kaya felt the moment it all started to slip out of control. Felt the tension in the room build to critical mass, like a storm about to break. Alaric slammed his staff against the floor, the sound echoing like thunder. Enough. This tribunal was called to determine if Ronan is fit to rule and if the female poses a threat. I think we have our answer to both. He looked to the other counselors, who nodded one by one. Ronan, you are hereby stripped of your title as Alpha King, permanently and irrevocably. Your bond to this female has compromised your judgment beyond repair. You are exiled from the Shadowlands, effective immediately. Kaya felt Ronan flinch through the bond, the pronouncement hitting him like a physical blow. And the female, Alaric continued, turning his cold gaze on her, is declared an enemy of the realm. The sentence is death to be carried out. By me. Theron stood, and his voice carried absolute authority. As the ranking alpha present, it's my duty to execute threats to the pack. No. Kaya's mind reeled. This was it. The moment the vision had warned about. She was going to die here, in this hall, in front of hundreds of witnesses. And Ronan gods, she could feel his anguish through the bond, the impossible choice he was being forced to make. Fight his father and condemn everyone in this hall to violence. Or stand aside and watch her die. Father. Ronan's voice broke. Please. Don't do this. Theron drew his blade, the ancient steel that had probably killed silver flame wolves during the purge. I'm sorry, my son. But some choices have to be made. He moved fast, faster than Kaya could track. One moment he was on the platform, the next he was in front of her, blade rising for a killing strike. Ronan lunged, but he was too far away. The chained warriors screamed. The crowd surged. And Kaya's power exploded. Not controlled. Not directed. Just pure survival instinct translated into wild magic that erupted from her core like a star going nova. Silver fire filled the hall, bright enough to blind, hot enough to make wolves cry out and stumble back. It didn't burn, not exactly, but it pushed, repelling everything that meant her harm with overwhelming force. Theron was thrown backward, his blade clattering across the floor. The counselors scattered. Warriors fell to their knees, unable to stand against the wave of raw power. And in the center of it all, Kaya stood with silver flame pouring from her skin, from her eyes, from every part of her. She could feel the wild magic responding, the ancient power of her bloodline fully awakened and utterly beyond her control. Stop. Ronan's voice cut through the chaos, and somehow, impossibly, his presence anchored her. The bond between them flared bright, and she latched onto it like a lifeline, using it to pull the power back under control. The silver fire dimmed, retreating back beneath her skin. The hall came back into focus, overturned furniture, wolves pressed against the walls in fear, the council scattered and shaken. And in the center, Theron on the ground, looking up at her with something that might have been respect. You see, he said quietly, and it wasn't clear who he was addressing. This is what I warned about. What the silver flame becomes when threatened. This power could level cities. Destroy entire territories. I wasn't trying to destroy anything, Kaya said, her voice shaking. I was trying not to die. And in the process, you proved exactly why you're too dangerous to let live. Alaric had recovered, his expression hard. No wolf should possess that kind of power. It's unnatural. Uncontrollable. Only because you're forcing her to use it in self-defense. Ronan positioned himself between Kaya and the council. Every time you threaten her, attack her, try to kill her, you make the power defensive. Violent. If you'd just leave her alone. We can't leave her alone, Theron interrupted, climbing to his feet. The other packs won't allow it. They've already sent their demands. If we don't execute her, they'll come here and do it themselves. Then let them come. Ronan's voice was steel. Let them see what happens when they try to murder an innocent wolf for the crime of existing. Let them face the power they're so afraid of and learn that maybe, it's only dangerous when you try to cage it. You're talking about war. I'm talking about finally standing for something right. Ronan's control shattered. For 28 years, I've enforced laws that were built on lies. I've executed wolves who didn't deserve to die. I've maintained a system that crushes anyone who doesn't fit the mold. And I'm done. I won't do it anymore. I won't kill her to make you comfortable. I won't cage her to make the other packs feel safe. If that means war, then so be it. At least we'll be fighting for truth instead of maintaining a lie. The hall erupted again, wolves shouting over each other, the careful order of the tribunal dissolving into chaos. And in that chaos, Kaya made a decision. She couldn't let Ronan sacrifice everything for her. Couldn't let him start a war, condemn his people, destroy himself trying to protect her. The bond between them was real, powerful, but it wasn't worth the ocean of blood that would be spilled. The vision had shown her a choice. And she finally understood what it was. Stay and fight and watch the world burn. Or run and give them all a chance to survive. Ronan, she said softly, and he turned to her. Through the bond, she pushed everything she felt, love and gratitude and grief and absolute certainty. Then she ran. Not toward the doors. Toward the windows high on the hall's eastern wall. Her power surged, controlled this time, focused, and she used it to launch herself up, silver flames propelling her higher than any normal wolf could jump. Glass shattered. Cold air hit her face. And then she was through, free-falling toward the rocky ground below. Behind her, she heard Ronan scream her name. But she was already gone, shifting midair into her silver wolf, landing on 4 paws and running like she'd been born to do, toward the forest, toward freedom, toward a future where maybe they could both survive if only she was brave enough to face it alone. The bond stretched between them, singing with pain and protest, but it didn't break. And as Kaya ran, power streaming from her like a comet's tail, she made a silent promise to the moon and to herself. She would find another way. Would learn to control this power, master it, make it something other than a weapon. And when she returned, if she returned, it would be on her terms. Not as a threat to be contained, but as exactly what she was always meant to be. Free. Kaya ran for 7 days. 7 days alone in the wilderness, pushing herself to the edge of exhaustion and beyond. She didn't stop to rest, didn't let herself think about what she'd left behind. Just ran, her silver wolf eating up miles of territory, crossing into unclaimed lands where the wild magic grew thick enough to taste. The bond screamed the entire time. Ronan's anguish bleeding through the connection, his rage and grief and desperate need to find her. She felt every attempt he made to track her, felt him calling through the bond, begging her to come back, to let him protect her. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because if she heard his voice, if she let herself feel the full weight of what she'd left behind, she'd turn around. And then everything, all the sacrifice, all the pain would be for nothing. But she wasn't just running away. She was running toward something. The shrine. The sacred place her grandmother had shown her in fragmented memories, the one Nara had visited in secret throughout Kaya's childhood. A place older than the silver-flamed shrine Ronan had taken her to, older than the Purge, older than Pack Law itself. A place where the wild magic pooled so deep it had its own consciousness, its own will. A place where she could learn. Kaya found it on the 8th day, guided by instinct and the pull of magic recognizing magic. It sat in a valley so remote no pack had claimed it, protected by terrain too harsh for most wolves to navigate. Ancient standing stones ringed a natural spring, and the water glowed faintly silver even in daylight, saturated with power that had been building undisturbed for centuries. She collapsed at the water's edge, her wolf form melting back into human, and finally, let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The grief hit first. Raw and overwhelming, the loss of Ronan's physical presence like a limb torn away. The bond was still there, still strong, but distance had muted it enough that she could think past the constant pull to return to him. Then came the rage. At the council for forcing this choice. At Theron for wielding his blade. At a system so broken it demanded she die just for existing. At herself for running instead of fighting. And beneath it all, buried deep relief. Because for the first time in her life, she was completely alone. No pack watching her every move. No grandmother warning her to stay hidden. No mate trying to protect her. Just Kaya and the power she carried and the wild magic humming in the stones around her. No one to protect except herself. No one to hide from. No one to prove anything to. Just freedom. She stayed in that sacred valley for what felt like an eternity and no time at all. Days bled into weeks, the world outside fading to insignificance as she finally, truly learned what she was. The power came easier without the seal suppressing it, without fear holding it back. It responded to her emotions, yes, but also to her intent. Her will. When she focused, she could shape it not into violence or destruction, but into creation. Healing. Light that didn't burn but illuminated. Heat that warmed instead of consumed. The wild magic taught her, though not in words. It showed her through sensation and instinct and bone-deep knowing. How to listen to the earth's heartbeat and match her own rhythm to it. How to draw power from the moon's light and the stars' distant fire. How to channel the ancient energy that flowed through everything without being consumed by it. She learned to shift between forms fluidly, human to wolf to something in between, a hybrid form that combined the best of both. Learned to move through shadows, to make herself invisible to normal sight, to sense other wolves from miles away through their connection to the pack bonds she could now perceive like threads of light. And slowly, painfully, she learned control. Not the suppression she'd practiced her whole life. Real control. The kind that came from understanding rather than fear. From accepting the power as part of herself instead of something foreign that needed to be contained. She was meditating by the spring on the 21st day when the vision hit. Not like before, in the silver flame shrine. This was sharper, more urgent. A warning. She saw Ronan kneeling in chains. Saw him in the great hall, surrounded by wolves bearing the insignias of multiple packs. The Eastern Territories had come, just as threatened. Along with the Western Alliance and the Northern packs. All of them demanding justice for the Silver Flame's awakening. Demanding Ronan's execution for bonding her. The vision shifted, showing her the warriors who'd stood with them. They were there too, still chained, beaten worse than before. Kaya saw the young female. Her name was Mira. She knew somehow, barely conscious, silver burns covering her wrists and throat. And standing over them all was Theron, his blade drawn, his expression carved from stone. The vision fast-forwarded, showed her the moment of execution. Ronan refusing to renounce her, refusing to beg for mercy, meeting his death with his head high and her name on his lips. Showed her the exact moment the bond would shatter and kill her too, thousands of miles away, alone in a sacred valley with no one to witness her last breath. The vision released her, and Kaya was on her feet before she consciously decided to move. They were going to kill him. Today. Maybe within hours. And she was 7 days' journey away. The old Kaya, the one who'd been branded and exiled and taught to hide, would have despaired. Would have known it was impossible to reach him in time, would have collapsed under the weight of helplessness. But the Kaya who'd spent 3 weeks learning what she truly was, who'd touched the wild magic and felt it respond like coming home, she knew better. Distance was negotiable when you carried the power of the old bloodlines. Kaya walked to the center of the stone ring, to the spring that glowed with accumulated magic. She could feel the power here, centuries of it building undisturbed, waiting for someone who could channel it. She knelt at the water's edge, pressing both palms to the surface. "I know you can hear me," she said to the ancient consciousness that lived in this place. "I know you've been teaching me, preparing me. And now I need to ask for more than lessons." The water rippled though there was no wind. "I need to borrow your strength. Just enough to cross the distance between here and the Shadowlands. Enough to save the wolves who stood for freedom when it meant death." The water began to glow brighter, silver light rising from the depths. "I promise I'll return what I borrow. I'll come back, keep learning, honor what you've taught me. But right now my mate is going to die because he chose me, and I won't let that happen." The light exploded upward, a column of pure power that engulfed her completely. Kaya gasped as magic flooded her system, more than she'd ever channeled before, more than should have been survivable. But instead of burning her, consuming her, it wove itself through her own power, amplifying it, creating resonance. The wild magic had answered. And it was saying yes. Kaya stood, power crackling around her like visible lightning. She could feel the distance between here and the Shadowlands, could sense Ronan's presence through the bond like a beacon calling her home. 7 days on foot. She could make it in 7 heartbeats. She gathered the power, shaped it with intent and will and desperate need, and tore a hole in the space between where she was and where she needed to be. The world folded. Kaya stepped through. The great hall erupted into chaos the moment she appeared. 1 second the center of the room was empty. The next, Kaya stood there, power radiating from her in visible waves, silver flames wreathing her body like wings. She'd arrived in her hybrid form, human posture but wolf eyes, claws instead of fingernails, power flowing through her like visible light. Every eye turned to her. Hundreds of wolves from a dozen different packs, all frozen in shock at the impossible entrance. Kaya's gaze swept the hall, taking in everything in an instant. Ronan on his knees, silver chains binding his wrists and throat, blood on his face from fresh wounds. The 12 warriors in identical chains, barely conscious. Theron with his blade raised, seconds away from the killing stroke. And surrounding them, the visiting alphas and their warriors. Wolves who'd come to demand justice, to see the threat eliminated, to ensure the silver flame bloodline ended today. "No." Kaya's voice rang out, amplified by the power flowing through her. "This ends now." Theron recovered first, his blade shifting to point at her. "You. How did you?" "It doesn't matter how." Kaya stepped forward, and wolves scrambled back, creating a path. The power around her intensified, responding to her will. "What matters is I'm here. And I'm not running anymore." "Then you're a fool," Alaric said from his seat on the council platform. "Coming back here is suicide. We have the combined strength of 6 territories. You're one wolf. Powerful, yes, but still mortal." "Am I?" Kaya let the question hang. "I've spent 3 weeks learning what I really am. What the Silver Flame bloodline actually was before your genocide tried to erase us. And I've discovered something interesting." She raised one hand, and silver fire danced across her palm. "Not destructive. Beautiful. Mesmerizing. You were right to fear us," she continued. "Not because we're violent or chaotic or any of the lies you told yourselves to justify the purge. You were right to fear us because we're free. Because our power doesn't bow to alpha dominance, doesn't fit into your hierarchy, doesn't need permission to exist." "Seize her." One of the visiting alphas, a massive male from the eastern packs, gestured to his warriors. They moved forward, a dozen of them, trained fighters who'd probably killed silver flame wolves during the purge. Kaya didn't move. Didn't even raise her hands in defense. The moment they got within 10 feet of her, the power flared. Not an attack. A barrier. Pure energy that stopped them cold, held them frozen mid-step. I'm not here to fight you, Kaya said. I'm here to offer you a choice. We don't negotiate with abominations, another alpha spat. Then you're going to die. Kaya let the words drop like stones. All of you. Because you came here thinking you'd intimidate one frightened girl. But I'm not frightened anymore. And I'm not a girl. I'm the last daughter of a bloodline you tried to exterminate, and I carry the accumulated power of every silver flame wolf your kings murdered. The frozen warriors suddenly found themselves thrown backward, crashing into their comrades. Gentle enough not to cause serious injury. Hard enough to make a point. I could kill everyone in this hall, Kaya continued, and let them see the truth of it in her eyes. I could bring this entire stronghold down around your ears. Could level your territories and salt the earth so nothing grows for 100 years. That's what you're afraid of, isn't it? That's what keeps you awake at night. The possibility that one of us survived, learned to use our power, and came back for revenge. Silence. Absolute and terrified. But that's not what I want. Kaya's voice softened. I don't want revenge. Don't want to rule over you or destroy you or force you into submission. I just want to exist. To live freely without being hunted or branded or forced to hide what I am. Impossible, Theron said. Your very existence threatens the pack structure. Good. Kaya cut him off. The pack structure is broken. Built on fear and dominance and the lie that some wolves are born to rule while others are born to serve. It needs to be threatened. Needs to be torn down and rebuilt into something better. Anarchy. Choice. Kaya's voice rose, power flaring with it. The freedom to live according to your nature instead of being forced into roles that serve the powerful. That's what the Silver Flame offered. That's what you killed them for. And that's what I'm going to give back to every wolf in every territory. She turned, looking directly at Ronan. His eyes were wide, drinking her in like he'd spent 3 weeks dying of thirst and she was water. The bond between them blazed to life, no longer muted by distance, and she felt his love and pride and absolute faith pouring through it. I ran, she said to him, though her voice carried to everyone. I left you to face this alone because I thought that was the only way to save you. To give you a chance to survive if I wasn't here to be used against you. Kaya. But I was wrong. She moved toward him, and the crowd parted, too afraid or too awed to stop her. Because we're stronger together. Because the bond between us isn't a weakness, it's exactly what the moon intended. The Silver Flame and the Alpha King. The old magic and the new order. Together, we're the bridge between what was and what could be. She knelt before him, her hands covering his chained wrists. Silver fire flowed from her palms, not burning, but melting the metal like snow in sunlight. The chains fell away, clattering to the stone floor. Together, she repeated, we're unstoppable. Ronan surged forward, his arms crushing her against him, and for a moment the whole world narrowed to just them. The bond sang, complete again, whole. His forehead pressed to hers, and she felt his words through the connection before he spoke them aloud. I thought I'd lost you. Never. Kaya pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I just needed to become who I was meant to be. To stop being afraid of my own power. And now? Now I'm ready to fight. She stood, pulling him up with her, and turned to face the assembled wolves. All of you came here for justice. For proof that the Silver Flame is too dangerous to exist. So here I am. Judge me. But understand that whatever judgment you pass, you'll have to enforce it against both of us. The visiting alphas exchanged glances. Kaya could see them calculating, weighing their combined strength against what she'd already demonstrated. Most looked uncertain. Afraid. But one stepped forward. The Eastern Alpha, the one who'd ordered his warriors to seize her. He was old, probably old enough to have participated in the purge personally, and his eyes held the kind of hatred that had been nursed for decades. You think power makes you invincible, he said. That because you can throw around some flashy magic, we'll all bow down and accept you. But you're still just one wolf. And no matter how strong you are, you can't be everywhere at once. Warning bells went off in Kaya's mind. What did you do? The Eastern Alpha smiled, cold and cruel. While you were hiding in whatever hole you crawled into, we weren't idle. We searched, investigated, found every wolf in every territory who might carry even a trace of the old bloodlines. Kaya's blood ran cold. 37 wolves, he continued. From children to elders. We have them all in custody, awaiting execution. And unless you surrender yourself, submit to binding and sealing and whatever else we deem necessary to make you safe, they die. All of them. Every potential silver flame, every possible threat, eliminated just like we should have done 100 years ago. The hall erupted. Some wolves shouting in approval, others in horror. The 12 warriors who'd stood with Ronan and Kaya began fighting their chains, rage and helplessness on their faces. And Kaya felt the power inside her respond to the threat. Not with fear. With absolute, incandescent fury. You're bluffing, Ronan said, but his voice carried doubt. Am I? The Eastern Alpha gestured, and his warriors dragged forward a small wolf, a child, maybe 8 years old, terrified and crying. This pup's grandmother was Silver Flame. The power hasn't manifested yet, but our seers say it will. So we'll start with her. Kill one every hour until you surrender. The child whimpered, and something in Kaya's chest cracked wide open. All her life, she'd been told her power was dangerous. That she was a threat. That the Silver Flame bloodline was too violent, too chaotic, too destructive to be allowed to exist. But standing here, looking at a child about to be executed for crimes she hadn't committed, for power she hadn't even manifested yet, Kaya finally understood what real violence looked like. It looked like genocide dressed up as justice. It looked like murder cloaked in the language of protection. It looked like wolves so drunk on power and control that they'd kill innocents and call it duty. Let her go. Kaya's voice was quiet, absolutely calm. And somehow that was more terrifying than if she'd shouted. The Eastern Alpha laughed. Or what? You'll kill us all? Prove you're exactly the monster we've said you are. No. Kaya stepped forward. I'll show you what a real monster looks like. Power exploded from her core, vast and ancient and utterly beyond anything she'd manifested before. This wasn't just her own magic. This was the wild power she'd borrowed from the sacred spring, woven through with the accumulated strength of every Silver Flame wolf who'd died in the purge. She could feel them with her grandmother, her mother, ancestors stretching back centuries. All of them channeling through her, lending their power to this moment. The hall's stone floor cracked, silver light pouring from the fissures. The wall shook. And Kaya rose into the air, lifted by magic that made the earth itself tremble in recognition. You want to judge the Silver Flame? Her voice resonated with power, with the voices of the dead speaking through her. Then face us. All of us. Every wolf you murdered, every child you killed, every innocent you executed, because you were afraid of what you couldn't control. The light intensified, becoming almost blinding. And in that light, shapes began to form. Spectral wolves made of silver fire, hundreds of them, filling the hall until there was barely room to breathe. The ghosts of the purge, given form by Kaya's power and their own lingering rage. Wolves screamed, scrambling back, but there was nowhere to run. The spirits surrounded them, didn't touch them but didn't need to. The weight of their presence, the sheer accusation in their ghostly eyes, was enough. These are the wolves you killed, Kaya said, her voice carrying over the chaos. The ones you called monsters. Threats. Dangerous aberrations that had to be eliminated. Look at them. See them. And tell me which of us is really the monster here. The spirits moved through the crowd, stopping in front of specific wolves. Kaya understood, these were the executioners. The ones who'd carried out the killings personally. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by guilt or fear. Others tried to flee and found themselves trapped, hemmed in by the dead they'd created. The Eastern Alpha had gone pale, staring at a spirit that stood directly before him. An adult female wolf, her spectral form showing the wounds that had killed her. She looked at him with such sorrow, such profound disappointment, that he actually flinched. "Father," the spirit whispered, and it was barely audible, but everyone heard it. "You killed your own daughter." The words hit the hall like a bomb. Murmurs erupted, wolves backing away from the Eastern Alpha as the truth sank in. He'd killed his own child for carrying the Silver Flame bloodline. Had probably led the charge in his territory's purge to cover his own shame. She was corrupted, he tried, but his voice broke. She was innocent, the spirit said. We all were. And you murdered us anyway. Kaya descended slowly, her feet touching stone, but the spirits remained. The borrowed power was still flowing through her, more than she'd ever channeled, and she could feel it pushing her to the edge of what was survivable. But she held on. Just a little longer. "I could kill you all right now," she said, looking at the Eastern Alpha, at Theron, at Alaric and the Council and every wolf who'd supported the purge. "Could let the spirits of your victims tear you apart. Could bring this whole place down and call it justice." She paused, letting them feel the weight of that possibility. "But that would make me exactly what you've accused me of being. And I refuse to give you that satisfaction." Kaya raised both hands, and the spirits began to fade. Not disappearing, she could still feel them, still hear their whispers, but becoming transparent. Returning to whatever place they'd come from. "Instead, I'm going to offer you the same choice I offered before," she continued. "Except that the old ways were wrong. Except that the Silver Flame bloodline has a right to exist. Release every wolf you're holding, and swear by the moon that you'll never hunt us again." "And if we refuse?" Alaric's voice shook, but he still asked. Kaya smiled, and it held no warmth. "Then I'll go to each of your territories personally. I'll find every wolf you're threatening to execute, and I'll free them myself. I'll tear down every prison, break every seal, and show them exactly what they're capable of. And when I'm done, you won't be fighting one Silver Flame wolf. You'll be fighting an army of them." The threat hung in the air, and Kaya watched realization dawn on face after face. She could do it. They'd seen enough of her power to know she absolutely could do everything she'd promised. "This is blackmail," someone said. "This is survival," Kaya countered. "Yours and mine. Because if you force me to fight, if you make me go to war to protect my bloodline, I will win. But the cost will be catastrophic. Territories will burn. Thousands will die. Everything you've built over the last century will crumble." She looked at Ronan, who stood beside her with absolute certainty in his eyes. Then at the 12 warriors still in chains, at young Mira who was watching her with something like worship. "Or you can choose peace," Kaya continued. "Choose to let us live freely, and in return, I promise the Silver Flame bloodline will never be used as a weapon against you. We'll heal instead of harm. Create instead of destroy. We'll teach any wolf who wants to learn that there are other ways to access power, other ways to be, that don't require dominance or submission." "You're asking us to give up control," Theron said quietly. "I'm asking you to stop trying to control what was never yours to control in the first place." Kaya met his eyes. "Your son understands that. He's willing to burn his kingdom down to build something better. The question is whether you're brave enough to do the same." Father and son stared at each other across the hall, years of conflict and love and disappointment hanging between them. Finally, Theron lowered his blade. "I was there," he said, and his voice carried absolute exhaustion. "During the purge. I was 16, and my father, Ronan's grandfather, he made me participate. Said I needed to understand what it meant to rule, to make hard choices." He looked down at the weapon in his hand, ancient steel that had probably killed dozens of Silver Flame wolves. "I've spent my entire life trying to convince myself it was necessary. That we had no choice. That the old bloodlines really were too dangerous to exist." His hands clenched. "But watching you now, seeing what you could do versus what you choose to do, I think I've known for a long time that we were wrong. I just didn't want to admit it." He dropped the blade. It clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the silent hall. "I can't speak for the other territories," Theron said. But the Shadowlands will honor your terms. We'll release any wolves we're holding. We'll lift the ban on old bloodlines. And we'll accept that the Silver Flame has as much right to exist as any other wolf. One by one, the other alphas began to nod. Some reluctant, some relieved, but all recognizing they had no real choice. The alternative was war with a wolf who'd just demonstrated she could channel the dead and crack stone with a thought. Only the Eastern Alpha remained defiant, hatred burning in his eyes. "I will never accept this," he snarled. "I will hunt every last one of you down, finish what the purge started." He cut off with a strangled gasp as his own daughter's spirit materialized directly in front of him, close enough that he could see every detail of her spectral face. "Then you'll die trying," the spirit said. "And when you do, I'll be waiting to ask you if it was worth it. If holding on to hate and fear and control was worth losing everything that mattered." She faded, and the Eastern Alpha collapsed to his knees, something in him finally, catastrophically breaking. Kaya felt the borrowed power beginning to ebb, the wild magic returning to its source. She'd pushed herself to the absolute limit, and her body was starting to remember it was mortal. Exhaustion washed over her in waves, and she swayed. Ronan was there instantly, his arm around her waist, holding her upright. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you." Kaya leaned into him, letting him take her weight. The spirits had fully faded now, returning to rest. The power had dimmed to manageable levels. And in the hall, wolves were slowly coming to terms with what had just happened. The world had changed. The old order had fallen. And somehow, against all odds, they'd survived to see what came next. Alaric rose from his seat, looking older than Kaya had ever seen him. "Release the prisoners," he said to the warriors. "All of them." Immediately. Chains rattled as the 12 warriors were freed. Mira stumbled forward, falling to her knees in front of Kaya, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing us we could be more than they told us." Kaya reached down, helping the young warrior to her feet. "You already were. You just needed permission to believe it." She looked around the hall, at hundreds of wolves watching her with a mixture of fear and hope and cautious respect. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Building something better is going to be hard. It's going to take time and patience and more courage than any of us probably have. But we start today, right now, with the choice to be better than what came before." And as she stood there, Ronan's hand in hers, the silver flame burning steady and true in her eyes, Kaya finally understood what her grandmother had been preparing her for. Not to hide, not to survive, but to transform the world. One choice at a time. 6 months later, Kaya stood on the cliff overlooking the valley where it had all begun. The sacred spring still glowed in the distance, a silver beacon visible even from here. But it wasn't alone anymore. Across the territories, in places that had been dead and silent since the purge, wild magic was awakening. Springs that hadn't glowed in a century were coming back to life. Ancient stones were humming with power. And wolves, so many wolves, were discovering that the bloodlines everyone thought had been extinguished completely had only been sleeping, waiting for permission to wake up. The change hadn't been easy. 3 territories had refused the peace terms and closed their borders, choosing isolation over evolution. The Eastern Alpha had taken his own life 2 weeks after the tribunal, unable to live with what he'd done to his daughter. And there were still wolves who looked at Kaya with fear, who whispered that the silver flame would bring ruin, that accepting the old bloodlines was a mistake that would destroy them all. But there were more who looked at her with hope, who brought their children to learn about magic that didn't require dominance, who asked questions about the old ways, about how their ancestors had lived before pack structure, before hierarchy, who were brave enough to imagine a different future and work toward building it. Ronan appeared beside her, settling on the cliff's edge with the easy familiarity of someone who'd learned exactly where she went when she needed to think. 6 months, and the bond between them had only deepened, grown more complex. They'd learned each other's rhythms, each other's wounds. Learned how to fight and how to forgive. Learned that choosing each other wasn't a one-time decision, but something they had to do every single day. The Northern Alliance sent word, he said. They want to meet. Discuss opening their borders to wolves carrying old bloodlines. That's good. Kaya leaned into him. Progress. Slow progress. All real change is slow. She smiled slightly. My grandmother used to say that the things worth having take time to build, and anyone promising quick solutions is usually selling you something that'll crumble. Ronan's arm came around her shoulders. Wise woman. Terrifying woman, Kaya corrected, and they both smiled at the familiar exchange. Below them, in the valley, a group of young wolves were training, learning to channel their power under Myra's supervision. The former warrior had taken to teaching like she'd been born for it, fierce and patient in equal measure. Kaya watched one of the students, a boy maybe 15, successfully manifest his first spark of silver flame and felt pride swell in her chest. That boy would never have to hide what he was. Would never be branded or exiled or told his existence was a crime. Because of what she and Ronan had fought for. Because of the choice they'd made to burn down the broken system and build something better from the ashes. Do you ever regret it? Ronan asked quietly. Giving up the chance to just disappear? You could have crossed the southern border, started over somewhere no one knew what you were. Lived in peace. Kaya considered the question. 6 months ago, she might have said no immediately. Might have been certain that this, fighting for change, standing as a symbol, carrying the weight of an entire bloodline's redemption, was exactly what she was meant to do. But 6 months had taught her nuance. Had shown her the cost of being a symbol, of having every wolf in every territory watching and judging and expecting her to be perfect. The loneliness that came with power, even when she was surrounded by allies. The exhaustion of constant vigilance, knowing there were still wolves who'd kill her if given the chance. Sometimes, she admitted, when it gets hard, when I'm tired and angry and wondering if anything we're doing actually matters, sometimes I think about what it would have been like to just be Kaya. Not the last silver flame, not the Alpha King's mate, not a symbol or a weapon or a catalyst. Just a wolf who got to live quietly. She felt Ronan tense and added quickly. But then I think about that boy down there. About Mira and the others. About every wolf who's been told they're broken or dangerous or wrong for being what they are. And I remember why we're doing this. She turned to face him. I don't regret choosing you. Don't regret choosing us. Even on the hardest days, I'd make the same choice. Ronan's hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Even knowing what it would cost? Especially knowing what it would cost. Kaya covered his hand with hers. Because nothing worth having comes easy. And this, what we're building, it's worth everything. He kissed her then, soft and sure, and the bond hummed between them like music. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers, and they just breathed together for a moment, grounded in each other's presence. Theron asked to see you, Ronan said eventually. Kaya's eyes opened. Your father. He's been working with the council, helping draft new laws, ones that protect old bloodlines instead of criminalizing them. He wants your input. Ronan paused. He's trying, Kaya. Really trying to make amends for what he did. What his father did. Amends can't bring back the dead. No. But they can honor them by making sure it never happens again. Ronan's voice was careful. You don't have to forgive him. You don't have to forgive any of them. But if you're willing to work with him. I know. Kaya sighed. I know it's politically smart. Shows unity, proves the silver flame isn't vindictive. Makes the transition easier for wolves who are still afraid. That's not why I'm asking. Ronan pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I'm asking because my father is trying to be better than he was, and part of me thinks he deserves the chance. But if working with him hurts you, if it costs you too much, I'll do it. Kaya cut him off. Not because I forgive him. Not even because it's politically smart. But because showing mercy when you have the power to take revenge, that's how we prove we're different. That's how we break the cycle. Ronan looked at her with such profound love and respect that it made her chest ache. You're extraordinary, he said quietly. I'm tired. But she smiled as she said it. And scared. And making this up as I go. But I'm trying. We're both trying. Ronan stood, offering his hand. And somehow it's working. Kaya let him pull her to her feet. Together, they stood on the cliff, looking out over the valley where young wolves were learning to be free, where wild magic was seeping back into a world that had tried to kill it, where the impossible was slowly, painfully becoming real. Do you think it'll last? She asked. What we're building? Or will it all crumble the moment we're not here to hold it together? I think, Ronan said slowly, that we're planting seeds. Some will take root and grow. Others will wither. But enough will survive that the forest we're growing will outlast us. He squeezed her hand. We're not building something that depends on us being perfect or immortal. We're building something that can adapt and change and survive because it's rooted in truth instead of fear. Kaya wanted to believe that. Wanted to trust that the sacrifices they'd made, the battles they'd fought, would mean something beyond their own lifetimes. But the truth was, she didn't know. None of them knew. They were writing a new story in a world that had been following the same script for 100 years, and there was no guarantee it would work. No promise that wolves raised on hierarchy and dominance would actually embrace freedom and choice. No certainty that the old bloodline's awakening wouldn't bring new conflicts, new challenges they hadn't anticipated. All they had was hope. And each other. And the stubborn refusal to give up just because the path was hard. Maybe that would be enough. Maybe it wouldn't. But they'd find out together. As the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of amber and gold, Kaya felt the spirits stir. They were always there now, just beneath the surface of her consciousness. The wolves who died in the purge, whose power she'd channeled in the Great Hall. They didn't speak often, but she felt them watching. Waiting to see if the world they'd died fighting for would finally come to be. She thought about her grandmother. About Nara, who'd spent her entire life hiding, who'd sacrificed everything to keep Kaya alive. Who died believing her granddaughter would have to do the same, suppress her power, make herself small, survive by being invisible. Nara had been wrong about that last part. But she'd been right about everything else. The moon puts certain wolves in our path for a reason. Nothing is random, especially not the connections that scare us most. Kaya had been terrified of Ronan when they first met. Terrified of the bond, of what he represented, of the choice loving him would force her to make. But that terror had been the catalyst. The push she needed to stop hiding and start fighting. And now, 6 months later, she was standing on a cliff overlooking a valley full of wolves who were learning to be free because she'd been brave enough, or desperate enough, or stubborn enough, to refuse the cage one more time. Would her grandmother be proud? Kaya thought so. Hoped so. But she'd never know for sure. All she could do was keep moving forward. Keep choosing freedom over safety, truth over comfort, growth over stagnation. Keep being the wolf the world had tried to kill, and in doing so, prove that some things couldn't be destroyed no matter how hard you tried. Some things were too wild to be contained. Too true to be silenced. Too necessary to be denied. Like love. Like power. Like the fundamental right to exist as you were made to be. Ready? Ronan asked, and she realized he was waiting for her, hand extended. Kaya took it, lacing their fingers together. Ready. They descended from the cliff together, toward the valley, toward the students and the work and the endless, exhausting, beautiful task of building a better world. The sun set behind them, and the first stars emerged. And somewhere, in the space between one breath and the next, Kaya heard her grandmother's voice one last time. You did good, little flame. You did so good. The words settled into her bones like benediction, like permission to rest, like acknowledgement that she'd carried the weight as far as it needed to go, and now, she could share it with others. She wasn't alone anymore. Wasn't the last anything. She was the first. The first silver flame wolf to live openly in 100 years. The first to choose love over survival. The first to stand in front of the world and say, "This is what I am, and you will not make me apologize for it." And because she'd been first, others could follow. That was legacy. That was victory. Not perfection. Not certainty. Just the simple, radical act of existing freely and making space for others to do the same. The story could have ended here. With Kaya and Ronan walking into the sunset, their bond secure, their victory won. The branded traitor who became a queen. The exiled wolf who changed the world. A neat ending. A satisfying conclusion. But that would be a lie. Because real change doesn't end. It evolves. Adapts. Faces new challenges that couldn't have been anticipated. The seeds they planted would grow, yes, but into what? Would the old bloodlines awakening bring harmony or new conflicts? Would the territories that closed their borders stay isolated, or would they become threats? Would the next generation honor what Kaya and Ronan built, or would they take it for granted and slowly let it crumble? The story isn't over. It's just beginning. And maybe that's the real truth beneath this tale. That there are no neat endings when you're fighting for something that matters. No final victory that lets you rest forever. Just the daily choice to keep choosing freedom, keep choosing truth, keep choosing each other even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. So I'll ask you this. If you were there in that great hall, watching a branded wolf stand before her executioners and offer mercy instead of revenge, whose side would you have chosen? Would you have stood with the council, with tradition, with the safety of the known even if it was built on lies? Or would you have stood with Kaya, with truth, with the terrifying beauty of tearing down the broken and building something new? Would you have chosen her or feared her? Loved her or tried to cage her? Seen her power as a threat or recognized it as the freedom you'd been craving your whole life? The answer matters. Because Kaya's story, the branded traitor who became a symbol, the exiled wolf who refused to die, the last daughter who carried the flame forward, it's not just her story. It's the story of everyone who's ever been told they're too much. Too powerful, too wild, too different, too free. Everyone who's been branded by a world that feared what it couldn't control. Everyone who's had to choose between hiding and burning. And if her story lit something inside you, if you felt the brand burning into your own skin, felt the relief of the seal finally breaking, felt the terrifying joy of standing in your full power and refusing to apologize, then you belong here. In Shayla's romance library, where we tell stories that burn. Where wolves refuse to be tamed and love refuses to be caged. Where the broken girls become queens and the exiled become legends. Where every story asks the same question Kaya's does. What would you sacrifice for the freedom to be fully, completely, unapologetically yourself? Subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because Kaya's story isn't over. There are territories still closed, bloodlines still waking, wolves still learning what it means to be free. There are new threats coming, old wounds that need healing, and a world that's being reborn one choice at a time. And you're going to want to see what happens next. Because here, in this library, we don't just read about wolves who change the world. We become them. Hit that subscribe button. Join the pack that chooses freedom over fear. And remember, the brand they gave you was never proof of betrayal. It was proof you were powerful enough to scare them. And that, my friend, is exactly the kind of wolf the world needs more of. The moon is watching. The silver flame is burning. And somewhere, a wolf who was told she was nothing is standing on a cliff, holding the hand of the king who chose her, looking out over a world they're reshaping together. The question is, are you brave enough to join them? Welcome to Shayla's Romance Library, where the outcasts become legends. And love is always worth the fire.